I... I've never even been kissed.
I've never even been kissed. Beth Robbins whispered the words into the dark, trapped inside a dead elevator with a stranger. The building had already stopped shaking, the lights were out, and somewhere high above the city, Beth was falling apart, beside a deaf man who stayed terrifyingly calm. As the air died in her lungs, his calloused hands found the buttons of her blouse, pressing her trembling palms to his chest, until her body began to answer the steady rhythm of his. But Beth didn't know who she was trapped there with. She didn't know the stranger beside her was the kind of man whose name people only ever whispered. The Silent King, a billionaire who built his empire in the dark and ran it the way only mafia men know how. And while Beth poured her heart out in the darkness, believing every word was safe, he was reading every secret off her lips. She had no idea that surviving that elevator was only the beginning. The Harrison Technology lobby gleamed like money always does. Marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, San Francisco morning light flooding every surface until the whole atrium felt too bright, too exposed. Beth had worked reception here exactly 1 month, long enough to know which executives nodded and which ones walked past her like furniture, and long enough to feel by mid-morning that whatever was happening upstairs had the entire building running on a frequency she didn't recognize. The lobby was wrong in a quiet, specific way. Dark suits moving in 2s and 3s, conversations clipped short, eyes cutting upward more often than made sense for a regular Thursday. The atmosphere felt less like preparation and more like held breath. She'd heard the name before noon. People said it briefly, carefully, a name they only whispered, as if the syllables themselves were made of glass that might shatter if spoken too loudly. Dorian Harrison. She'd looked him up her first week, out of curiosity, but just curiosity, and found almost nothing. One financial headline, one partial image from a conference 3 years ago where he was half-turned from the camera. No interviews, no profile, no social presence of any kind, just the faint outline of someone who had decided very deliberately not to be found. His brother Zach was everywhere. Panels, profiles, magazine covers. Dorian Harrison was a name without a face. She still didn't have a face for him when Wesley appeared at her desk at 11:47, already moving like something upstairs had gone wrong and he needed it fixed before anyone noticed. He leaned over the counter, dropping his voice. Dorian Harrison just came through. Beth looked up toward the lobby, toward the cluster of dark suits still moving near the elevator bank. Broad shoulders, briefcases, the polished backs of heads. They all looked like the same person from this angle. None of them stopped. "You need to go upstairs." Wesley's voice dropped. "Now." "Why me?" "We need someone who can sign. Right now. Upstairs." Wesley's voice had the clipped efficiency of someone relaying a problem he needed solved in the next 30 seconds. "There's been a complication with the rooftop meeting. The nearest interpreter available is 40 minutes out. Someone asked if anyone in the building could cover it, and your name came to mind." He paused. "Your brother is deaf, isn't he?" "Yes." Her stomach dropped about 3 floors. "I know sign language." Wesley tilted his head, watching her face for half a second. "Can you do it?" She almost said, "I think so." What came out was, yes. She thought of Noah, his university fees, the quiet world she was working herself to the bone to protect. This job was the only thing keeping them both from drowning. Wesley was already gone. She glanced down at her legs as she walked. The run in her stockings had been manageable at 8 in the morning. By now it had traveled the full length of her thigh, visible to anyone who looked. She'd spent the morning behind the desk, keeping her knees together and hoping no one noticed. Now she was being sent upstairs. She made one stop first. The executive floor bathroom was quieter than the rest of the building. Different carpet, lower light, the kind of space that feels borrowed. She pushed into a stall, peeled off the stockings, and dropped them in the trash. Then she stepped to the sink and ran cold water over her wrists. She looked at herself in the mirror. Dark brown hair in a ponytail, a few strands loose, large eyes doing that thing they did when she was nervous, which was look even larger. Small and bare-legged, and her pulse doing something she wished it would stop doing. "You're just translating," she told herself. That's all. She wasn't entirely sure she believed it. She dried her hands and left. She pressed the call button and stood there with her arms crossed over her chest, watching the numbers descend. When the doors opened, she stepped inside and pressed the rooftop. The doors had nearly closed when a hand came between them, and her whole body went still before she even turned. They opened again. The man who stepped inside was tall, dark-haired, in a charcoal suit that fit him the way expensive things fit people who never have to think about the cost. He pressed his floor without glancing at the panel and turned to face forward. A silver watch caught the light at his wrist. Sharp jaw, a faint scar through his left brow, his face completely still. The face of someone who had long ago stopped performing anything for anyone. He didn't acknowledge her. The elevator started moving. She stole a sideways glance. Just once, just a second. Light green eyes, already facing forward. She snapped her attention back to the numbers and focused very hard on remembering how to breathe. The cab was small. She hadn't noticed that before. She could feel the space between them, 18 inches, maybe less, and the particular silence of two people pretending the other isn't there. She kept her eyes up, her shoulders down, her face neutral, then his gaze dropped. She felt it the way you feel a change in temperature. Slowly at first, then all at once, on her legs, on the bare skin below the hem of her skirt. Her face went hot, and she stared at the floor numbers like they were the most important thing she'd ever read, and she did not move, did not breathe, did not give him anything. Beth Robbins was standing next to the man everyone in the building whispered about, and she thought he was just a stranger. The elevator had been climbing for maybe 20 seconds when the city came apart. Not a tremor, not a warning. A full, bone-deep lurch that started somewhere far below the foundation and travelled upward through the steel frame of the tower in one violent wave. And then the lights died, and the floor dropped from under them, and Beth's stomach went weightless for one terrible second before the brake caught, and the whole cab slammed to a grinding, shuddering halt between floors. The impact threw her hard into the wall. Her shoulder took it. Her hands found nothing. Darkness, complete, pressing in from every direction. The only light came from an emergency strip along the floor, bleeding a thin, sickly green across the metal beneath her feet. Her ears were ringing. Her hands were already shaking. She turned toward the shape she could barely make out in the green-lit dark. "Sir?" Her voice came out wrong. Too thin. Half swallowed. "I think that's an earthquake. Are you okay?" His silhouette hadn't moved. Shoulders level, spine straight, facing the doors. He gave no sign he'd heard her at all. Her chest closed up. Not fear exactly. Just the dark arriving all at once, the air already tasting thinner than it should. She pressed her back against the panel and made herself breathe, slow and deliberate, but her lungs were not cooperating. Claustrophobia didn't announce itself. It arrived like water filling a sealed room. Her legs stopped holding. One moment she was upright, the next she was on the floor, back against the panel, palms flat on cold metal. She was going to embarrass herself if she wasn't careful. She heard the fabric shift before she could track him in the dark, and then he was crouching beside her, low enough that the emergency strip caught his jaw, the line of his brow. His eyes moved over her quickly and came to rest on her face. His mouth formed two words, slow and deliberate. "You okay?" "I can't." She pressed a hand flat to her sternum. "I can't be in closed spaces. I can't breathe. I need... Please, I need..." He was reading her lips. She could see him doing it, tracking the shape of her words, not her eyes. When she ran out of breath to finish the sentence, he leaned in close enough that she could see his mouth move in the dim green glow, and spoke. "I'm going to open your buttons." His voice was low and unhurried. "So you can breathe. Stay still." His hands came up, steady, deliberate, and found the top buttons of her blouse. 1, 2. Not taking, not rushing, just opening enough space for her chest to expand. Then he took both her hands and pressed them flat against his own chest, just below the collarbone, against the firm rise and fall of his rib cage. "This." His voice was barely above a murmur, calm and deliberate. "Match this. Breathe with me." Her first breath with him, was ragged. The second was better. His chest rose. Hers followed. His chest fell. Hers did too. His heartbeat was steady under her palms, and she focused on it until the walls stopped closing in quite so fast. She'd spent the whole morning worrying about her bare legs, and now her hands were pressed against a stranger's chest, and somehow that was the least of her problems, which was either a very good sign or a very bad one. She lifted her hands into the thin green light from the floor strip and signed slowly. "Do you have a phone? For light?" He went very still. His eyes dropped to her hands, watching them with a focus that had nothing casual in it. He looked up at her face. "You know sign language?" Something sharpened in his face. Not the polite interest of someone making conversation. Real surprise. "Yes." She kept her hands in the light. "My brother is deaf." He leaned in closer and spoke. Direct, no hesitation, his voice carrying the flat certainty of someone stating a fact they have long since made peace with. "I can't hear you. I'm deaf." He tapped the device behind his ear. It stopped working. He shook his head slowly when she pointed at the floor strip light. No phone. Then he looked at her directly. "Look at my eyes." His voice was low and steady. "Feel that I'm here with you. Don't be afraid." Beth held his gaze. The green glow was barely anything. Just enough to make out the shape of him, his expression level and unhurried. She breathed in, out. Her hands had stopped shaking quite so hard. He leaned in close, his face angling toward hers in the dim glow, close enough that his lips would be visible. "Your name." She started to sign it, and he watched her hands for just a moment before he reached out in the dark and found her wrists, holding them gently, his fingertips resting over her moving fingers. His voice dropped, deliberate. "I can understand you this way. Keep going." Beth felt him follow each sign as she made it, his grip adjusting with the shape of her hands, reading her through touch in the dark. Their faces, barely visible to each other in the thin green glow. "Beth," her hands spelled. "I'm Beth." He nodded. "Where did you learn sign language?" "My brother, Noah. He was born deaf." She felt him follow every movement. "I learned because he needed me to. His name is Noah." He repeated it back, not a question, confirming he'd understood. "How long have you been working here?" "1 month. I'm at the reception desk." She hesitated. "I was nervous today. The owner is here. I've never seen him." Something moved in his expression, brief, almost imperceptible in the low light. He nodded once. His voice was steady and unhurried. "This building was built to withstand a major earthquake. The power will stay off for about 30 minutes. Security protocol. After that, the elevator will start working again." He held her gaze. "We'll be out of here." Beth let out a breath she hadn't fully realized she'd been holding. Her shoulders came down from somewhere near her ears. "I'm glad you're here," she signed. He was quiet for a moment, then he stood. She watched him rise to his full height in the narrow cab and reach upward toward the emergency hatch in the ceiling, testing it with both hands. It didn't move. He shifted his weight, tried again, and the cab swayed just slightly, enough to throw his balance sideways. He caught the wall with one hand. Beth was already reaching for him, her hand closing around his forearm before she'd decided to. She moved her hands up his arm in the near dark, checking his shoulder, his side. "Are you hurt?" He looked down at her hands on him, then at her face. He shook his head. The corner of his mouth moved. Reluctant, almost private. He sat back down beside her, close now, shoulders touching. The green-lit dark had started to feel almost familiar. Beth was aware of him differently now. The scent of him. Something dark and clean, stronger in the warm, closed air. His voice carrying a low frequency she'd started to recognize. The warmth of his hands every time they found hers. She was aware of all of it, and pretended she wasn't. She suspected he was aware of her too. In the thin light she caught him looking, not at her face for lip reading, just looking, at her hair, her hands, the line of her bare legs against the cold floor. He spoke first. "Were you going up for the rooftop meeting?" "Yes." She turned her face toward him so her lips would catch the light. "They needed someone who could interpret. Today the owner is here. I was going to see him for the first time." "So you didn't see him?" His voice was almost dry. "What did you hear about him?" His fingers found hers in the dark and resting lightly over her hands as she signed so he could read her. "Cold," she signed. "Ruthless. The kind of man who doesn't make mistakes and doesn't forgive them in anyone else." His head tilted slightly. "Frightening." She spoke slowly, turning each word toward him. "I think people who seem frightening are usually protecting something. Everyone has a story. I'm sure Mr. Harrison has a heart somewhere, things he cares about, things that matter to him." She looked at him in the half-dark. "Don't you think?" "What do you mean?" he asked. She kept going, her hands moving in the green light while his fingers followed them. "Some people choose to seem that way, to hide their pain, their vulnerabilities. It's easier than being seen." She looked at him in the half-dark. "I'm sure even Mr. Harrison has things he loves, things that matter to him." He was very quiet for a moment. "And who are you?" She signed into his hands. He held her hands for a moment without answering. Then he spoke. "John." He held her gaze for a moment. "Sales department." Beth read it twice. She looked at him. The suit, the self-containment, the green eyes steady in the thin green glow. Something clicked. "Wait!" She turned her face toward him so he could read her lips. "I was called upstairs because they needed a sign language interpreter." She watched his eyes. "Was I going up there for you?" He nodded once. "Yes, you were going to help me." 20 minutes had passed. No sound from outside, no light except that thin seam of daylight filtering down from somewhere above, barely there, just enough to give the dark a vague, underwater quality. The floor strip's green glow was the only certain thing. The cab had grown warmer. He reached up and shrugged off his jacket, set it aside, then his tie, then 2 buttons on his shirt, unhurried. They sat shoulder to shoulder against the wall, the warmth of him a solid fact against her side, their shoulders and legs touching in the narrow space. Beth shifted slightly and signed into the light between them. "Is there someone waiting for you? A wife? Children? Someone who matters?" He was quiet for a moment, then the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "A dog." His jaw eased slightly. "Max, he's the closest thing I have." She looked at him. "That's it? People disappoint." He said it flat, certain, not asking her to respond. "Consistently and thoroughly. Max does not." "That makes me sad." She held his gaze. Her hands moved again, his fingers resting lightly over them. "If something happens to us in here, my brother will have no one. That's my real fear, not the cable." Her hands slowed. "What does he do without me?" He watched her hands, then, "So you take care of him. Where is the rest of your family?" She swallowed. His fingers stayed on hers steady as she signed it. "They died 5 years ago. A traffic accident on a Thursday afternoon." Her hands moved slowly. "We're alone. Just the 2 of us." He felt it anyway. In the stillness of her hands, the pressure against his fingers going tight, and then barely moving at all. He reached up and found her face in the dark, his thumb moving once across her cheek. She hadn't realized she was crying until he did it. His hands took hers and held them steady. "They'll get us out. Both of us." She wasn't sure she believed him, but his hands were warm, and the dark was slightly less than it had been. The building moved again. Not the sharp lateral lurch of before. This one came from directly above, a deep metallic groan that traveled down through the walls, and then the walls shuddered. Beth grabbed his arm on instinct, her nails finding the fabric of his shirt. He pulled her in, one arm around her, drawing her against him, and she ended up in a configuration that neither of them had planned. Beth in his lap, her legs folded on either side of his back against the wall, her face very close to his, in the half-dark. Neither of them moved. He was worried, She could feel it in the new tension in his jaw, the way his hands stayed at her waist, firm and certain. But he kept his expression level. He wasn't going to show her. Her breathing was accelerating again. The panic was coming back. "Stay with me." He caught her face in both hands, tilting her chin so she was looking directly at him. "Look at my eyes." In the thin, fluid light, his eyes were very green, startlingly green. She hadn't fully seen them until this moment. "Do you think the cable will hold?" Her voice was barely there. "Are we going to die in here?" "No." His voice was steady. "Don't think about that. Just look at me." His thumb moved along her jaw, tilting her face toward his in the thin light. "I can see your lips this clearly." His eyes stayed on her mouth. "I can lip-read everything you say." He held her gaze. "Tell me your biggest fear." She swallowed. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "Dying in here. I have so much I still want to do. My life shouldn't be this short." "What do you want to do?" His voice was quiet but focused, pulling her forward. "Tell me, what are your dreams?" She breathed in. Then she began. She wanted to be able to take care of herself and Noah, stand on her own feet without depending on anyone. She'd left SF State, animation and digital media, second year. When the accident happened, she was going back to finish. She was going to. "And at night, I work on my app." She turned each word toward him carefully. "One touch, any surface, and anyone who can't speak or hear can make themselves understood instantly. No translator needed. Maybe one day with AI support they could truly have a voice." Her mouth curved slightly. "When I finish it, maybe I could get it in front of Zach Harrison." His mouth curved slightly, just slightly. Dorian Harrison would be more interested in that. His voice came out almost dry. "That's more his territory." Beth smiled, uncertain, a nervous flicker more than warmth. "Well, maybe it's my fate that someone from sales is trapped in here with me instead." She glanced up at the ceiling. "Maybe I'm supposed to be here." He'd been watching her face. His gaze had gone somewhere quieter. At that moment, the elevator lurched. Another sharp drop, the cable screaming, and a piece of the ceiling panel tore loose and crashed to the floor between them. Beth's nails went straight into his arm, and her breathing shattered. "Beth!" His voice cut through low and certain, both hands on her face. "Eyes on me. Keep talking." She couldn't. Her chest had locked, and her hands were shaking too hard to sign, and she was staring at the broken ceiling piece on the floor between them. His thumb pressed gently against her jaw. "What else do you want?" His voice was quiet, pulling her forward. "You have your whole life ahead of you. Is work really all you dream about?" Beth turned her eyes to his. She swallowed. "I want someone to love me." Her voice came out quieter than she'd intended, barely above a breath. His eyes stayed on her lips. "I want to fall in love. I want someone I can trust." She pressed her lips together. "I've never even had a boyfriend. I know that sounds, how old are you?" His hands stilled around her wrists, waiting. 24. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "I had to work, to keep us both going. There wasn't time for—" The floor dropped, not far, 10 feet, maybe less, one sudden sickening lurch downward before the brake caught again. But enough. Beth's stomach went with it, and her hands flew to his shirt, and she heard herself make a sound she'd never made before. He looked up at the ceiling. She could see his jaw set, the calculation moving behind his eyes. And for the first time since the earthquake, he didn't look entirely certain. He looked at the cable housing. He looked at the floor. He didn't say we'll be fine. Something in his expression had shifted, contained, careful. But there. He wasn't sure either. "Oh, God." Her voice was barely a breath. I've never even been kissed. I'm going to die without ever being kissed." His eyes came back to hers and stayed there. Then he reached up and turned her face toward his, just his fingertips at her jaw, barely contact, tipping her chin so her lips were level with his gaze in the dim light. The distance between them was nothing. 4 centimeters, maybe less. She could feel his breath. She could feel his heartbeat through his hands, faster now, no longer the controlled rhythm she'd been counting on. His gaze dropped to her mouth, then came back up. He didn't move. Neither did she. The green light caught the line of his jaw, the slight tension in it. She was aware of her own breathing, shallow, unsteady. Telling the truth, her face wasn't showing. He leaned in, stopped. She felt her stomach pull tight. A single involuntary contraction. Her heartbeat was in her ears now, loud enough that she was certain he could somehow feel it. What is he doing, she thought. What is he... Then his mouth found hers, warm, unhurried. Her breath cut off completely. Her lips parted before she decided to let them. His kiss was soft and slow, and she felt it in layers. The pressure first, then the warmth spreading outward, then the taste of him, cool, faintly mint, and underneath that a quality entirely his own that went straight to her head. She forgot, for a moment, where they were. He pulled back just enough to be read. His voice was very quiet, and there was something in it she hadn't heard before. Careful, almost tentative. Did it work? Beth's heartbeat hadn't slowed. She nodded. His hand found her waist and drew her closer, closing the last distance between them until her body was against his. When he kissed her again, it was different, urgent, certain, nothing held back. His lips moved against hers, unhurried and certain, nothing between them anymore. His lower lip brushed hers, then his tongue traced the edge of it, slow and deliberate, and heat unraveled low in her stomach and spread outward before she could stop it. He drew her upper lip between his and held it, just a moment, and everything behind her ribs went still. Then his tongue parted her lips. Heat flooded through her, downward from her chest, and she realized distantly that she was kissing him back, not deciding to, just doing it. Her hands found his shirt. Her body pressed into him without instruction. She kissed him the way she'd always imagined she might, if she'd ever had the chance to learn, instinctive, unguarded, completely open. She pulled away, breathing hard. His mouth was at her ear, his voice barely more than breath. Low, private, meant only for her. Focus only on my touch. Don't think about anything else. His fingertips moved along her jaw, her throat, light, deliberate, taking their time. Her breathing changed before she noticed it changing. The panic had retreated. Something warmer had moved in where the fear had been, and it spread without asking permission. His hand slipped inside her blouse, palm warm against her ribs. She felt his jaw tighten. Don't think about bad things. His voice went quieter still. Just this. Beth bit her lip. She could feel his restraint. The deliberate care of it, the effort it was costing him, the way he was holding himself to a pace she could follow. Want curled low inside her, slow and impossible to ignore. She turned her mouth to his ear and whispered it into the dark. All I can think about right now is you not stopping. He went very still. Then the corner of his mouth curved against her cheek. Barely. Just barely. And his hand moved to her waist, pulling her closer until there was nothing left between them. Her lips parted. The elevator swayed again. A short, sharp tremor. Beth's eyes flew upward. His hands came up immediately, turning her face back to his. Beth. His voice was low and certain. Look at me. Only me. Don't see anything else. Don't hear anything else. He held her face in both hands. You are remarkable. You're intelligent, and you're extraordinary. And you are going to do everything you said you want to do. His thumb brushed slowly across her lower lip. You have a whole life ahead of you. His voice went quieter still. And God, you smell incredible. I'm barely holding on. She pressed her palms flat against his chest through his open collar and felt his heartbeat slam against her fingers. He pulled her closer, and she let him, and whatever fear was left dissolved into the dark. She could feel him through the fabric. and something in her went very still for a second before it gave way entirely. She kissed him back with everything she had, her body moving against his without instruction. He pulled his shirt off. Her fingers twisted into his hair. She stopped thinking entirely. The building groaned, a deep metallic shudder that moved through the walls and the floor. The elevator swayed. Beth didn't flinch. She bit her lip, her eyes staying on his face, her body still warm and close against his. The fear had gone somewhere, she couldn't find it. He leaned in until his lips were at her hair, his voice barely sound at all, more breath than words. "Do you want this?" She didn't hesitate. She nodded. His hands moved to her legs, palms against her calves, then slowly, deliberately, upward. She kissed him and stopped thinking. His hands reached her hips, fingers pressing into her skin, pulling her closer against him. And then, at that exact moment, the lights came back on. Not gradually, not with warning, all at once, brutal, fluorescent, merciless, flooding every corner of the elevator cab, in the kind of light that left absolutely nowhere to hide. They both froze. Beth was in his lap. His shirt was gone, her blouse was open, and her hair had come loose at one side, and they were looking at each other in the full, unsparing fluorescence of a functioning elevator. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Beth let out a breath, half laugh, half something she couldn't name. And he did too, and they were both laughing quietly, with the relief of people who had genuinely not known if they were going to make it. Then the intercom crackled. "This is building emergency. We're getting you out. Hold on, 2 more minutes." Beth slid off his lap and found the floor with her feet and pulled her blouse straight with hands that weren't entirely steady. He reached for his shirt, shook it out, buttoned it, each motion deliberate and unhurried, returning himself to the version of himself he'd walked in with. His gaze stayed on her the entire time. She couldn't hold it directly. Her eyes moved over him in quick, stolen glances, his bare chest, the line of his shoulders, the sculpted cut of his jaw. His eyes, very green in the fluorescent light. The clean profile she'd been trying to read in the dark for an hour and a half, now fully visible and somehow worse than she'd imagined. The small scar cutting through his left eyebrow. She swallowed. He reached for his tie. His jaw was tight and he was very deliberately not smiling. The scent of her was still on him. He hadn't looked away. Beth smoothed her skirt, then smoothed it again. She was looking at the elevator panel, the floor, the seam between the wall panels. Anywhere but at him, her face was on fire. "Thank you." The words came out in a rush, aimed somewhere at his collarbone. I know what that was. You were trying to help me, to calm me down, and it worked, so thank you. For all of it, obviously. She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I'll stop talking now." He took her hand. His thumb pressed once against her knuckles. "I can't hear you." "Of course." She held his gaze, face scarlet, and signed it slow and clear, his fingers reading her hands. "Thank you for trying to calm me down." His eyes moved over her hands, reading. Then he looked up at her. "My pleasure." Low, unhurried, he looked at her. His eyes held hers. Steady and deep, the kind of look that didn't rush and didn't look away. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. Almost. They stayed like that for a few seconds, just looking at each other. His hand lifted, just slightly, toward her hair, and for a half-second she thought he was going to touch it. His fingers hovered. Then he pulled back like it had never been a real intention at all. The elevator descended and opened 1 floor below where it had stopped. Firefighters were waiting. At least 4 of them, with equipment and lights, moving with the calm efficiency of people who do this for a living. "Earthquake," one of them said. 6.1. You've been in there about an hour and a half. Systems locked. Standard protocol. Building looks good. Minimal damage. Beth stepped out. The corridor light was fluorescent and merciless, and she answered fine twice before she'd fully registered being asked. She turned. He was behind her, shirt buttoned, jacket back on, tie slightly loose, every surface of him composed. John from sales, watching her with those green eyes that had stayed on her the entire time they were being freed. "John," her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Maybe I'll see you tomorrow." Something in his face moved, barely there, gone before she could name it. She turned and walked, quickly, before she could do anything more embarrassing, like ask his last name, like touch her own lips in front of him. She did that last part anyway, pressed 2 fingers against her mouth halfway down the corridor, when she was sure he couldn't see her. Who on earth is John from Sales, she thought. She was still feeling it now, and she had no idea what to do with that. Her brother was waiting for her somewhere in this building. She pushed through the stairwell door and went to find him. The crowd outside Harrison Technology was thick and loud and still slightly stunned. The particular chaos of 300 people who had evacuated a building in an earthquake and weren't quite ready to go back in. Emergency vehicles lined the street. Glass from a cracked storefront window glittered on the sidewalk. Somewhere nearby, someone was crying. He walked through all of it without slowing. Zach Harrison was at the perimeter, phone to his ear, when he spotted his brother cutting through the crowd. His expression shifted from relief to something sharper. "Dorian." He fell into step beside him, lowering his voice. "Where the hell were you? We evacuated the entire building. I had security in the stairwells. I was in the elevator." Zach's stride broke. He looked at his brother more carefully. The slightly loose tie, the jacket carried rather than worn, something in his expression that had shifted since this morning. "Were you alone?" Dorian's eyes moved across the crowd. Patient, systematic, unhurried. He stopped on a figure cutting quickly toward the exit. Dark hair, white blouse, a black skirt. Moving fast, head down like someone trying to exit a scene she hadn't fully processed yet. He watched her until the crowd swallowed her. His eyes stayed on the crowd. "No." Zach followed his gaze to the now empty space and found nothing. He turned back. "Who was it?" His brother's voice was flat and final. "Beth Robbins, reception desk. I want everything on her, her file on my desk by this evening." Zach stared at him. "The receptionist?" "She's not just a receptionist." His eyes stayed on his brother's face. He pulled his jacket on and turned his back to Zach, looking out at the street. His jaw was tight, but there was something in his eyes, faint, almost hidden, that looked like a smile. "She interests me. More than she should." Zach watched him go. Then he pulled out his phone. Beth walked fast, then faster. The city was still doing its post-earthquake thing around her. People on sidewalks, sirens somewhere, a crack in the pavement she almost didn't see. She didn't slow down. Her head wasn't quite with her yet. She pulled out her phone and typed with one hand while she walked. "Are you okay? Are you home?" The 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Then, "Yeah. You?" She exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour and a half. Noah was home. He was in the kitchen when she came through the door, still in his pajamas, his laptop open on the counter. He looked up, looked at her more carefully. His hands came up immediately. "What happened to you?" Beth's blouse had come untucked at one side. Her hair was loose. She was still wearing her work badge, and her face was... She didn't know what her face was, but Noah was looking at it the way he always did when something was wrong, and she was pretending it wasn't. "I'm fine." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Earthquake. I was stuck in the elevator." His hands came up again. "Are you hurt?" "No." She crossed the kitchen and put her arms around him and held on longer than she normally would. He let her, his hands patting her back in the patient, slightly awkward way of a 19-year-old boy who wasn't sure what he was comforting, but was willing to try. "You're shaking," he signed when she finally let go. "I know." She pressed her lips together. "I'm going to shower." The water was hot. She stood under it with her eyes closed and her hands moving slowly over her skin, and felt his hands instead, his mouth. The taste of him, cool and faintly mint, and something underneath that had gone straight to her head. She pressed her forehead against the tile and let the heat work through her. Am I falling for him? The thought arrived without permission. What is wrong with me? She turned the water to cold, stood there anyway, breathing hard. I almost made love to a complete stranger, in a broken elevator, during an earthquake. She turned the water off. She stood there for a moment, dripping, the silence settling around her. Then she blinked. John, she murmured. I don't even know his last name. She stood there a second longer, water running down her arms. Why didn't he tell me? 3 days passed before the feeling dulled from acute to manageable. 3 days of going through the motions at her desk, looking up every time a tall man walked through the lobby, then hating herself for it. He only kissed you to calm you down, she told herself. You were just someone he happened to be trapped with. That's all you were. He didn't call. She didn't know his last name, didn't know how to find him, and the whole thing had been, as she'd told herself approximately 40 times, a survival response to an abnormal situation, and nothing more. On the 4th day, she couldn't help it anymore. He was working in this building. He was somewhere in these floors. He couldn't just have disappeared into the walls. She went to sales. She'd told herself she was just checking something. The department was on the 8th floor. She'd never had a reason to go up there. She found the directory on the internal system. Andrews, John, Senior Account Manager. A name, an office number. She stood outside room 814, knocked before she could talk herself out of it. The man who turned around from his desk was about his 50s, wore reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and had the comfortable, slightly rumpled look of someone who'd worked in the same office for a decade. "Yes?" His voice was pleasant and entirely wrong. "Can I help you?" Beth stared at him. "I think I have the wrong room." Her voice came out very calm. She turned and left. She made it to the stairwell before she stopped, sat down on a step, pressed her fingers to her mouth. If this was John, then who was the man in the elevator, the one who had held her hands in the dark, who had kissed her, who had looked at her like she was the only thing in the room worth looking at? Had I imagined him? She thought. Why did he tell me his name was John? Why would he? Her eyes burned. She blinked it back hard. Wesley was at her desk when she got back, shifting his weight in a way she recognized. Something had already gone wrong, and he needed it to be someone else's problem. "Beth." His voice had that edge again, the one she'd first heard the morning this all started. "Rooftop conference room, now. Zach Harrison's office called." She looked at him. "Me?" "You." He spread his hands. "I don't know why. Come tell me when you're done." She straightened her blouse, checked her badge was clipped correctly, took the stairs. Meeting room 2 was full when she pushed open the door. 4 men and a woman she didn't recognize arranged around a long table, all of them in the kind of suits that had been cut rather than bought. Zach Harrison sat at the head. She knew him from the lobby, from watching him walk through the main entrance without ever looking toward reception. Early 30s, brown hair, blue eyes, the practiced warmth of someone who was very good at rooms. He looked up when she entered. "Beth Robbins?" His voice was friendly and professional, landing somewhere between CEO and recruiter. She stepped inside. "Yes." "Come in. Sit." He gestured toward the table without looking up from his phone, finished whatever he was typing, and set it face down. "We're ready," he said quietly, to no one in the room. Beth kept her hands in her lap where no one could see them. Why am I here, she thought. Is this about the interpreter role? Is it about John? 1,000 questions, and no answers. Maybe it's for interpretation, she told herself. Maybe that's all this is. The door opened, and the room changed. He walked in without slowing, without looking at anyone in particular. The 5 executives straightened before they realized they were doing it. Zach stood. Everyone stood. Beth blinked and stood. When his eyes swept the room, they passed over her. And for 1 second, just one, they stopped. Her breath cut off completely, because she knew that face. The elevator. John. He was wearing black, a suit so precisely cut it looked structural rather than decorative. Dark hair, sharp jaw, the scar through his left eyebrow catching the overhead light. His eyes moved across the room in one clean pass, the same systematic scan she'd watched him do the moment he'd stepped out of that elevator. Beth bit down on her lip and looked at the table. Her heart was doing something she had no professional way to justify. He moved to Zach's side without looking at her again. He set his hands on the edge of the table, and the room waited. She caught it then, a glint behind his right ear, half hidden by the line of his jaw. Small, precise, a device so discreet it would have been invisible to anyone who hadn't already spent an hour and a half learning what it looked like in the dark. She looked at the floor. Her hands were pressing into her lap hard enough to leave marks. Zach's voice was smooth and practiced. As most of you know, Dorian Harrison doesn't attend meetings unless it matters. Today it matters. He glanced toward his brother. He'll be speaking to you about the new initiative. Dorian Harrison. Her stomach dropped straight through the floor. He was never from sales. He was the owner of Harrison Group, the Dorian Harrison. Beth's head stayed down. She was doing the arithmetic very quickly, and none of it was adding up to anything good. The man she had kissed in a broken elevator. The man who had held her hands in the dark and told her she was remarkable. The man whose last name she hadn't known. She knew it now. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed especially loudly. Beth did not look up for a long time. When she finally did, Dorian Harrison was looking directly at her. His face told her nothing. She felt her face go warm. She looked down again. His voice, when he spoke, was exactly as she remembered it. Quiet, unmonitored, calibrated to nothing. He placed both hands lightly on the edge of the table and looked across the room. The reason you're here isn't to be part of an ordinary product development cycle. He moved slowly along the table. Everyone in this room was selected for how they think, not just what they can build. The team we're forming will work on an area that appears to be outside Harrison's defense, security, and critical communications line, but will, in fact, determine its future. I want systems that people can use not only when they're functioning at full capacity, but when they're vulnerable. Systems for people who struggle to communicate, who can't read environmental signals the way others do, who fall outside the range of standard interfaces. Real-time communication, environmental awareness, intelligent alert mechanisms, adaptive interfaces, AI-supported personal response systems. Beth's head came up before she could stop it. Everything he was describing. She had notes on all of it, pages of them, written on a second-hand laptop that overheated after an hour. Someone on the right side of the table shifted forward. Mr. Harrison. Harrison Group's focus for the past decade has been defense technologies, secure communication infrastructure, critical security systems. The man paused. This area is considerably different from anything we've worked on before. Dorian turned his head toward the voice, unhurried. Yes, it is. He took one step forward. That's why it matters. The room went a degree quieter. Those contracts continue, but the future of this company isn't only in hard power, it's in understanding what human communication actually is, what breaks it, what repairs it. His voice didn't rise. Other companies build applications, we build systems. He walked to the far end of the table. From the outside, this team will represent Harrison's more human, more accessible, more future-facing side. But inside, what we build here will lay the foundation for something larger. His eyes tracked briefly to Beth. But the reason this project exists comes from someone who understood the problem before she understood the industry. Beth's hands pressed harder into her lap. He looked at her directly now, unhurried, absolute. When he spoke, his voice dropped just slightly. Elizabeth Robbins will serve as product consultant at the center of this team. The project's conceptual foundation is hers. The rest of you will build what she's already understood needs to exist. The room was very still. 5 people were looking at her. Her heart was loud enough to hear. Dorian Harrison was standing at the end of the table looking directly at her, and she had absolutely no idea what was showing on her face. She swallowed. He turned back to the room. You'll receive formal offers by end of day. Office transition is tomorrow. His voice dropped to its flattest register. Everyone here knows how I work. This team will work long hours and report directly to me. He let that settle for a moment. The project's name is Auralis. He pulled back from the table. I don't need to explain confidentiality requirements to people already under NDA, but I'll say it plainly. If I discover that anything discussed in this room has reached anyone outside it, that person's career in this industry is over. I have enough reach to make that promise and keep it. Nobody moved. You can go. Chairs pushed back around her and the room emptied. Beth stood with them. His voice dropped lower, quieter than everything before it, meant for one person. Miss Robbins. Her hand stopped on her bag strap. Her back was still to him. His voice was exactly the same as it had been in the elevator, low, unmonitored, belonging to no room in particular. She turned slowly. He was facing her now, hands loose at his sides, watching her with the same patience he'd had in the dark. Sit down. Beth sat. Her chest was rising and falling too fast. She pressed her hands flat on her knees and tried to slow it down. What happens now? She thought. The silence felt different when the last person left. Dorian was at the window, back to her, hands loose at his sides. 3 days ago, that man had held her hands in the dark. Today, he looked like he'd never heard of the dark. He turned, crossed to the table, placed the black folder in front of her. Beth's eyes dropped to the cover, Auralis, the project name in clean black letters, and somewhere inside, on a line she hadn't reached yet, her own name waiting for a signature. Her throat tightened. Slowly, she looked up. Dorian was already watching her. For days, she had replayed those eyes, the warmth in them, the way they had held hers in the dark, as if nothing outside that elevator existed. There was no warmth in them now. They were hard, controlled, sharp enough to make her look away almost immediately. "You've given me an opportunity." Her voice came out quieter than she meant it to. "I'm surprised, and I don't know what to say, but You don't need to say anything." His voice cut through hers cleanly. It wasn't loud, that made it worse. He set a pen on top of the folder. "Sign where it's marked, and join the project." Half an hour ago she had been sitting in that conference room trying not to shake, and now she was here, with a real project, a real contract, a real way toward the life she had been clawing at for 2 years. She waited for the feeling that was supposed to come with that. Instead, something cold had settled low in her stomach. She touched the folder, but didn't open it. "It's still just an idea. Notes, a few small working pieces, nothing finished. Why would you put me in a role like this?" Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not enough to be a smile, just enough to tell her he had expected the question. He stepped closer, each step deliberate, closing the distance, until he was standing directly in front of her, close enough that looking down was no longer an option. His voice went quiet. "Absolute. Look at my eyes, Beth." She did. His green eyes locked onto hers with quiet, unnerving certainty. Because everyone in that room knows how to build a system. His voice stayed low and even. None of them know why it needs to exist. They see architecture, scale, market value. You see the fracture first. You see the person who needs it before you see the product. He let that settle. His eyes didn't leave hers. "And because leaving you downstairs would have meant leaving you within reach of the wrong people." A chill moved through her. The words were precise and cold, and she felt them land that way. "If I moved you up here, it's because this is where you should be." Beth swallowed. There were things she wanted to say, and none of them were going to come out right. "I told you in that elevator that I don't trust people." His voice was quieter now, something stripped from it. "You're not like the people I'm surrounded by. You still have something most of them lost a long time ago." Her brows drew together slightly. His voice softened, barely. "A conscience. You still care what's right. You still think things should mean what they say." A pause, and he almost sounded disturbed by how much it mattered to him. "You still believe something can be built for the right reason." Then he came around the side of the table and leaned down, bracing both hands on the arms of her chair, boxing her in without touching her. "I want you close to me." The words moved through her so fast it was almost frightening. Her hands pressed flat against her thighs under the table. She should have felt triumphant, chosen. Instead, heat rushed through her, and dread came with it, and she couldn't pull them apart no matter how hard she tried. Her voice came out thinner than she wanted. In the elevator, Something in his face hardened, controlled, contained. "We are not talking about the elevator again." Flat, final. "No one will know about it. It didn't happen." He pulled back from the chair. His eyes stayed on her face, then, with no attempt to hide it, dropped to her mouth. His voice flattened out completely. "You're part of this team now. You work for me. That's all this is." Beth's throat burned, because that was not how he was looking at her. He was giving her cold, controlled words, while his eyes rested on her lips with the same dangerous stillness they had held in the elevator before he kissed her. It would have been easier if he had looked truly indifferent, easier if he had been cruel all the way through. Instead, he was disciplined, and somehow that was worse. She pressed her nails into her palm and steadied herself. She made herself look at him when she spoke. "Of course, Mr. Harrison." He still wasn't looking at her eyes. She reached for the folder and stood. "Can I have some time to read this before I sign?" Dorian gave a single nod. "You have until 8. I'll be on the private floor upstairs." A brief pause. "Sign it and bring it to me personally." That word stayed in her chest long after he said it. She nodded. Then she turned and walked to the door. Not fast, she made sure of that, pushed through it, and stepped into the corridor. The second the door shut behind her, her lungs remembered how to work. She stopped, pressed the folder against her chest, her back against the cold corridor wall. "Is this real?" she thought. "Did this actually just happen?" Auralis. Her project, her name on the contract inside. She waited for the feeling she'd imagined this moment would bring, the 2 years of late nights, the overheating laptop, the notes written in margins until the pages were too full to read. The feeling didn't come. All she could think about was the way his eyes had dropped to her mouth. She pressed one hand flat against her sternum and closed her eyes. "Why can't I just be happy?" Beth spent the rest of the afternoon at the reception desk in a state of quiet, unbearable distraction. She smiled when people approached, answered calls, directed visitors. Her body moved through the motions while her mind stayed trapped upstairs in that conference room under Dorian Harrison's cold green eyes. Every few minutes her fingers brushed the edge of the Auralis folder hidden beneath the desk, as if checking it was still real. By 2:30, she couldn't take it anymore. She texted Noah. "Can you come? I need you." He showed up 20 minutes later, tall and lean, backpack over one shoulder, dark hair falling into his eyes. The second she saw him through the lobby glass, something in her chest loosened. She got Wesley to cover her desk for 30 minutes and took Noah to the small coffee shop 2 blocks away. Quiet inside, the afternoon crowd still thin. They took a table near the back. Noah dropped his bag beside his chair, looked at her face for exactly 1 second, and didn't waste time. His hands moved. Something happened. Beth wrapped both hands around her cup. A lot happened. He waited. He was good at that. He never pushed, never filled silence before it was ready. So she told him, not every detail. Not the way the man had held her in the dark, or what happened when the lights came back on. She left that somewhere she wasn't ready to open. But enough. The earthquake. The elevator. The man who had called himself John. His deafness, the 3 days of fog. And then the truth. John had never existed. He was Dorian Harrison. By the time she finished, Noah had pushed back slightly in his chair, watching her with an expression caught somewhere between concern and disbelief. Beth let out a slow breath. "I don't know what to do." Noah tilted his head, signed first, a habit he slipped into when he was thinking hard, then let his voice follow. "Beth." Quiet. Steady. "This is an unbelievable opportunity. You've been building this for 2 years. She gave a small, tired laugh. "You helped me, a lot. I wouldn't have gotten anywhere near this without you." He shrugged, but she caught the flicker of pride he tried to hide. "That's not the point." He shifted forward in his seat. "The point is, this is the kind of chance people wait years for and never get. Real funding, real infrastructure, real reach." His fingers moved. "And Dorian Harrison would own it." "Yes." Her voice flattened slightly. "He would?" She held Noah's gaze. "Do you know what this company actually does?" He nodded once. "People in tech know Harrison Group, defense systems, secure communications, weapons-adjacent work." His mouth tightened. "And men with that kind of money always have darker things around them." Beth reached into her bag and set the contract on the table between them. "I read through it." Her voice stayed even. "Most of it is standard. Salary, position. 10% when the app launches." She paused. "Enough to cover everything. Your tuition, the rent, everything we've been carrying." Noah raised his eyebrows, reading it again. "That sounds good." "It does." She opened the contract, turned a few pages, and tapped a paragraph with one finger. "But look at this." Noah dropped his chin to read. His brows rose. "Expanded operational use." Beth's expression had gone still. His voice came out slower now. Once they own the rights, they can keep developing it, applying it however they want. He slid the contract back toward her. Not just the way you built it, meaning they could use it for things that have nothing to do with helping people. She didn't say it as a question. Noah sat back and let out a breath through his nose. Wealthy men rarely build anything for only one reason, Beth. Especially men like that. She pulled it back and turned to another page. There's more? Noah moved closer. She pointed lower. He read it silently. Then his face changed. What the hell is this? Beth said nothing. She turned the contract to face him fully. He read it again, this time aloud, slower. While working on the project, Elizabeth Robbins is required to inform Dorian Harrison about every person she is in contact with, whether the connection is professional or personal. She is not allowed to meet, speak with, or continue any contact without his prior approval. The words sat between them. Noah read the line one more time to himself, his fingers stilled on the page. Is this in everyone's contract, or just yours? Beth gave a small shake of her head. I don't know. He closed the contract halfway and stared at it. An NDA, a non-compete, ownership clauses, fine. But this? He tapped the page once. This sounds like he's buying your life, not hiring you. Beth stared at the table. That was exactly it. Not the money, not the title. This was what had been sitting wrong in her chest all afternoon. The clause didn't sound emotional, it didn't sound dramatic, it didn't sound cruel. It sounded formal, routine, as if men like Dorian Harrison were used to writing themselves into other people's lives until the line between business and ownership simply disappeared. Noah reached across the table and took her hand. She looked up at him. His expression had softened completely. You know I'm with you either way. His thumb moved once over her knuckles. This is a huge opportunity. Maybe the opportunity. But if something about it feels wrong, that matters more than the money. More than the app. His grip tightened slightly. No one gets to own your private life. Something in her chest gave way. She squeezed his hand back. Then she leaned over and kissed his cheek. I'm glad I have you. Noah gave her a crooked look. You literally raised me. You're stuck with me. That made her laugh, a real one, small and tired and grateful. It faded quickly. She dropped her gaze to the contract on the table. Auralis, her dream. Built in scraps of time and stubbornness and grief, late at night on a laptop that overheated if she pushed it too hard. And somehow, after everything that had happened upstairs today, it no longer felt like a door opening. It felt like something waiting for her to step inside and lock behind her. At 7:30, Beth glanced up at the clock across from reception for the 6th time in 10 minutes. What remained of Harrison Technology after hours was quieter than silence, sealed off as if the building only relaxed once most of the people were gone. Wesley appeared beside her desk with his jacket over one arm and his tie already loosened. We never got to talk about this morning. He glanced toward the elevators, then back at her. What was that? Why did they call you up there? Beth's fingers closed over the edge of the folder under the desk. She kept her expression easy. It was actually a job offer. His brows jumped. Something moved behind his eyes, surprise, and something less flattering underneath it. For you? I'll tell you when it's final. She held his gaze, pleasant and closed. Wesley's mouth tightened. He looked at her for a moment, the kind of look that was trying to figure out what had changed about her since this morning. You're mysterious all of a sudden. I'm really not. He glanced around the empty lobby, then back at her. You're still here? I need to finish something. He studied her for another second, then gave in with a shrug. All right. See you tomorrow. She waited until he crossed the lobby and disappeared through the revolving doors before reaching for the contract. The folder felt heavier tonight than it had in the conference room. Heavier than it had in the coffee shop with Noah. Heavier than paper should have felt in any sane world. Beth rose, slid out from behind the reception desk, and started toward the elevators. Her heels clicked against the marble, too loud in the empty lobby. She looked down once at the contract in her hand. Clause 12. Clause 30. Fine, she thought as the elevator doors opened. Then you can explain them to me yourself, Dorian Harrison. The corridor beyond the elevator didn't look like part of the same building. Lower light, pale wood paneling, the kind of quiet that felt enforced rather than natural. A frosted door marked Private Lounge unlocked itself as she approached and slid open without a sound. No one waiting, just more hallway, and at the end of it a tall walnut door with no visible handle that opened before she could knock, floor-to-ceiling glass, dark leather, a city burning gold behind it all. And there, standing at the window, was Dorian Harrison. He had been waiting, still standing, exactly where she imagined he would be. Not at his desk, not on a call, just waiting, like a man who had already decided the evening would go exactly this way. She crossed the room slowly, the contract held close against her body. By the time she stopped, she was close enough to see that he wasn't wearing a tie. 2 buttons at his collar were open. The formal lines of the day had loosened, but not enough to soften him. "Did you sign it?" Beth wet her lips, then wished she hadn't. "Not yet." She heard the dryness in her own voice. "I wanted to ask about a few clauses first." Something almost like amusement flickered at one corner of his mouth. He moved to the leather chair and sat without looking away from her, one ankle crossing over his knee. Effortless, controlled. Beth stayed on her feet. He tilted his head slightly. "Which clauses?" 12. She opened the folder, though she knew the language by heart. "And 30. He rested an arm along the chair and waited. 12 gives you expanded operational use. You'd retain the right to develop Auralis beyond its original framework, into communication systems, security systems, behavioral analysis. Her grip tightened on the folder. This application is designed to help people. The data it will collect is intimate. Emotional patterns, stress responses, communication behavior. She held his gaze. There should be limits to where that goes. His gaze sharpened. Are you asking whether I intend to turn your work into something else? I'm asking whether I'm agreeing to be part of something that could eventually hurt the same people I built it for. Dorian leaned back farther into the chair, one hand resting against the leather arm, the city lights cut into long, pale bands behind him. You won't be. Beth held his gaze. The answer had come too easily. But Clause 12 is what every company in this sector puts in its contracts. The words came flat, not warm. It means if the architecture proves adaptable, I reserve the right to scale it, improve it, integrate it, standard. That isn't an answer. He looked at her with the patience of someone who had no intention of being moved. It's the only one you're getting tonight. She held his eyes for a moment, long enough to make clear she wasn't satisfied, then turned the page. Then explain Clause 30. He went very still. She felt it before she saw it. The temperature in the room shifting, his attention narrowing onto her like something that had been waiting. She read it aloud, slowly. While working on the project, I'm required to inform you about every person I'm in contact with, professional or personal. I'm not allowed to meet, speak with, or continue any contact without your prior approval. She let the folder fall closed in her hands. That isn't standard, she said quietly. Dorian unfolded from the chair, not quickly. That would have been easier to read. He unfolded to his full height with a patience that gave her far too much time to watch him doing it, and by the time he started toward her, 1 step, 2, 3, 4, 5, her breathing had already changed. No, it isn't, he said. Her cheeks were warm. Her mouth had gone dry. She made herself hold his gaze. Then why is it in my contract? His eyes stayed on hers, unhurried. Because it applies only to you. Heat climbed into her face, unwelcome, furious. She wanted to look away. She didn't. Why? He took one more step, not enough to touch her, just enough to change the air between them. Her body registered it before her mind caught up. Her gaze dropped before she could stop it, just far enough to catch the open line of his collar, the warm skin at his throat. She could smell him now, that clean, cool mint scent from the elevator. Her pulse was stumbling. The words came low, unmonitored, stripped of everything professional, the same register she'd first heard in a broken elevator. Because from the moment you stepped into that elevator, you stopped being someone I was willing to leave to chance." Her breath caught, her fingers tightened on the folder. "That isn't an answer," she said quietly. "It is." He said it without warmth. "Just not one you like." She looked down at the folder in her hands. Something in her chest was pulling in two directions at once. "You told me we were never talking about the elevator again." His eyes dropped briefly to her mouth and came back. "We're not. I'm telling you what changed." She took a step back. He was already closing the distance, unhurried, as if her moving away hadn't registered as a variable worth adjusting for. Her shoulder blades found nothing to press against. There was nowhere left to go. "I don't understand you," she said flatly. "You don't have to." His hand lifted. For one suspended second she thought he was going to touch her face. Instead, one finger tipped her chin up, just enough to hold her eyes where he wanted them. The touch was light. What it did to her was not. "You only need to know this. While you're in Aurealis, you're inside my reach. No private meetings with outside companies. No conversations I haven't approved. No one gets access to you without going through me first." Her heart slammed against her ribs. She pulled her face back from his finger, her chin lifted slightly. "And that's supposed to sound reasonable?" "It's supposed to sound clear." His tone didn't change at all. She was already moving to the desk at the side of the room, pulling the signature page free. Dorian was watching, still and quiet from where he stood, not stopping her. "If what you mean—" She uncapped the pen, her fingers steadier than she felt, "is that I'm expected to work and stay focused and not hand pieces of this project to a competitor." She signed the first line, hard enough to score the paper. "Then I don't see a problem. I wasn't planning to date a defense contractor or whisper company secrets over drinks anyway." She signed the second page and turned it. "So if that's what belonging to you means in practice, Mr. Harrison," the title came out sharp, deliberate, "then there's no issue." The silence behind her thickened. She finished the last signature, closed the folder and turned. "I'm ready to start." Dorian was still watching her. An expression she couldn't read and didn't try to. She set the folder on the table between them, turned on her heel and headed for the door. She almost made it. His hand closed around her wrist just before she reached it, not roughly, but certain enough that she stopped. Beth turned her head. He was standing close enough that she could feel the heat of him at her back. His mouth was near her ear, too near. He said her name barely above a whisper. Beth. Her name, in that voice, did something immediate to the center of her. She hated that he could still do that. His breath brushed her skin. "Good night." Then he let go. Beth opened the door and walked out without looking back. Fast at first, then faster. The contract signed and left behind like a decision she wasn't ready to examine too closely. By the time the elevator doors were closing around her, her hand was still warm where he had touched it. She pressed her palm against the cool metal wall. "Dorian Harrison, are you playing with me?" The city dropped away beneath the glass, floor by floor. She watched it fall. Men like him didn't play. They decided. The answer settled in her chest. Her jaw tightened. Her brother's future mattered. Her own future mattered. She had not worked this hard and buried this much and survived this long just to become someone else's beautiful mistake. If this was a trap, she would learn its edges before it closed, and if it wasn't, she caught her own reflection in the polished metal doors, the heat still high in her face, the confusion she refused to name. That was the part that frightened her most. Not the contract, not the clause, not even the man standing somewhere above her in a room made of glass and intention. It was the fact that some part of her had wanted to stay. The conference room on the 32nd floor had glass walls on two sides, a long dark table, and a view of the city that didn't come cheap. Beth was standing at the front of it with a clicker in her hand and the skyline at her back, and she had already turned the clicker over twice without noticing. 5 people were seated around the table. All of them were looking at her the way people in rooms like this looked at someone they were still deciding whether to take seriously. Beth was the only one standing, which made the distinction between project consultant and girl from reception feel sharper than it probably looked from where they were sitting. She glanced once at the opening slide. Oralis. Then she faced the room and let the silence do the work for half a second before she opened her mouth. A system that doesn't just hear. She clicked forward. It decides what matters. That pulled every eye fully onto her, the slide behind her filled with a rough interface, phone-based, stripped down, nowhere near finished, but real enough to look like something rather than nothing. Oralis isn't a hearing aid. We're not trying to recreate hearing. She kept her voice steady, her weight evenly distributed, both feet on the ground the way she'd rehearsed at home at 11 o'clock the night before. We're building a real-time support system, something that identifies the signal that matters most and turns it into something the user can understand instantly. No one cut in. First version starts here. Her hand dropped from the clicker to the edge of the table. The problem isn't only missing sound, it's missing the important moment inside the sound. Their name, a warning, a shift in tone, the second before something goes wrong. Two people near the far end of the table had stopped looking at the slide. They were looking at her. The goal isn't more noise, she said. The goal is more clarity. Something in the room changed. Not dramatically, just a degree or two of temperature, the particular shift she'd felt once before when she was saying something in the dark that was actually being listened to. People had stopped reaching for their laptops, even the ones who had started the meeting with the faint, polite skepticism of people who'd sat through too many pitches were still now. I've already built a basic early version of part of this. She clicked to the next slide, a stripped-down demo, functional, if not elegant. It's rough, but it works. I'll walk you through what I have, and then, with your experience and the resources here, I'm confident we can take it considerably further. From the end of the table, Zach Harrison put down his coffee cup and looked at her over it. When you say further, his tone was easy, but his attention wasn't. What does that actually look like to you? What's the real vision here? It still caught her slightly off guard, that kind of attention from him. A few weeks ago, he'd been walking through the lobby downstairs without once looking toward the reception desk. Now he was sitting there in shirt sleeves with a loosened tie, asking about her long-term vision, as if the answer would change something. Beth tucked a strand of hair back, her fingers tightened once around the clicker. Right now, apps are the right place to start. Fastest path to something real, something we can test and iterate. She paused. But long-term, the ceiling is much higher. With Harrison Group's systems, we could get to a point where people with hearing and speech impairments aren't just supported. They're able to hear, to speak, to participate fully without a gap. She let that sit. That's a later project. For now, the app layer gives us the foundation. But I wanted you to know where this could go. A slow smile moved across Zach's face. Visionary, he said. I like that. The heat came up under her skin before she could stop it. By the time she was sitting back down, she was quietly annoyed at how much it had pleased her. Her eyes went to the conference room door almost without deciding to. Still closed. Still no sign of Dorian Harrison. Her new office was on the 32nd floor, glass partitioned, a step up from anything she'd occupied before, on a corridor that also housed Zach Harrison's office and the sealed, rarely accessed suite that apparently belonged to Dorian. The first week was pure chaos, in the way only new beginnings were chaotic, exciting and exhausting in equal measure, everything unfamiliar and slightly too fast. The only other woman on the team was Brenda, 28, sharp and dry-humored, and they fell into an easy rhythm over lunch in the third week that felt less like proximity and more like actual alignment. It was Brenda who filled in the gaps. Dorian Harrison, she explained, as if summarizing something everyone on the floor understood as a given, wasn't really here. He came in 3 or 4 times a month when something required it. The company's major deals went through him, the ones that no one else in the building had the reach to close, which meant he spent roughly half the year outside the country and the other half unreachable in ways that amounted to the same thing. The executives reported to Zach. Dorian reported to no one. Beth absorbed this over a plate of salad she wasn't tasting. She wasn't sure if the information made her feel better or worse. By the 3rd and 4th week, the team had stopped orienting and started moving. Real software progress, problems that had actual solutions, conversations that ended with something built, rather than just decided. Beth was staying until 8 most evenings, eating whatever she could find near the building, getting home late enough that even Noah had stopped expecting her to be good for conversation. She was building something. She could feel it taking shape under her hands. and Dorian Harrison was nowhere. Not on the floor, not in the corridor, not in any of the brief encounters she'd braced herself for without quite admitting that's what she was doing. The suite at the end of the hall stayed dark, the automatic doors stayed closed. She didn't ask about him. She told herself that was because there was nothing to ask. The coffee shop was 3 blocks from the building and harmless in the way she needed. Loud enough that the noise covered conversation, small enough that the tables felt private. Steam was hissing from behind the counter. Cups were knocking together. Normal human sounds in a normal human place that had nothing to do with contracts or sealed floors, or men who wrote themselves into your private life in legal language. Jason looked the same. He always looked the same. They'd been friends since their first year at SF State, back when she still thought she'd finish her degree, and he had the particular ease of someone whose life had gone more or less according to plan. Still smiling too easily, still talking too fast, still looking at her as though she belonged to a version of herself he found more comprehensible than whatever she'd become. He leaned back in his chair. So the new role is actually real? It's real. He raised his eyebrows. And you're good? I'm good. She almost believed it. You disappeared into one of the most intimidating buildings in the city, and now you look exhausted and expensive. His mouth curved. That seems like progress. A real laugh came out of her before she could stop it. Her phone lit up on the table. Unknown number. She let it ring. Then it rang again. Jason nodded toward it, and she picked it up. Hello? No answer at first. Then a voice she recognized from a broken elevator and 3 weeks of trying not to think about. Beth. Everything inside her tightened. Her eyes moved on instinct. Window, door, the chrome machine behind the counter, the street outside, nowhere. Who is this? She kept her voice even. His voice came low, certain. You know who this is. She did know, but she wasn't going to give him that. Mr. Harrison. Across the table, Jason's expression shifted. Not suspicious yet, just watchful. What can I do for you? His voice came low, certain. Who's with you, Beth? Her fingers tightened around the phone. How do you know where I am? Her voice came out thinner than she wanted. I know where you're not. He let that sit. And I know you're drinking coffee with someone. Beth turned slightly in her chair, as if she could fold the call into a smaller space. I'm heading back to the office shortly. The command was soft, but unmistakable. You know our agreement? Understood. She kept her voice flat. The line went dead. She set the phone face down on the table. Jason frowned. Everything okay? Beth produced a smile that didn't feel convincing even to her. Work thing? The walk back took 8 minutes. She was spending most of them angry, and the rest caught on a question she couldn't shake loose. He hadn't just known she was out, he'd known she was with someone. She pressed through the lobby doors and kept moving. The anger was easier to stay with than the fear, so she did. But underneath it, something else was insisting on being noticed. Something that felt less like alarm and more like a question she didn't know how to answer yet. The next evening, she was still at her desk, later than she'd meant to be, a coffee in one hand and 3 unresolved interface notes still circling in her head when she turned the corner into the corridor and nearly walked directly into Zach Harrison. Coffee jumped from the cup and spread across the cuff of her blouse. Oh! Zach caught her lightly by the elbow before she lost her footing, then looked down at the stain spreading across the pale fabric. Come on, my office. I've got something for that. It's fine. I'll deal with it in the restroom. Give me 30 seconds. He was already stepping aside and gesturing into the open office behind him. There wasn't a polite way to refuse, so she followed him in. His office had the same quality she'd noticed about the whole 32nd floor, luxury that had been deliberately restrained, as if everything in it had been chosen by someone who wanted comfort, but distrusted softness. Zach crossed to a low cabinet, came back with a cloth and a spray bottle, and bent toward the coffee stain with efficient, practical movements, his voice easy. I wanted to talk to you anyway. Beth was watching him. About what? He straightened a little, cloth still in his hand, though not enough to put distance between them. Outside the glass wall, the floor had thinned out, the skyline lights coming up as the corridors went quiet around them. His voice was measured, deliberate. About the fact that you've been on this project less than a month, and you've already changed how the team thinks about what it's building. She gave a short, self-conscious laugh. That sounds like more than it is. It isn't. His gaze stayed steady on her face, direct and open. Most people walk into a room like that and spend 6 months trying not to embarrass themselves. You walked in and started cutting through what didn't work. Beth looked away. At the city, at the glass reflection of the two of them, standing closer together than was strictly comfortable. I just know what wouldn't help the people I built it for. That's exactly my point. The cloth lowered to his side. You see the person before you see the system. That's rarer than you think. She should have thanked him and moved for the door, but Zach leaned one shoulder against the desk instead of stepping back, and something in his posture said the conversation wasn't finished. His voice went easier now, almost casual, the kind of casual that was still thinking. You know, ending up in that elevator with Dorian turned out to be one hell of a lucky accident. Beth turned so fast it almost hurt her neck. What do you mean? His expression didn't change much, but the answer took a second too long, just long enough for the question to sharpen inside her. Then a small smile crossed his face, not warm, more like someone who knew the punchline before he told the joke. He's clearly impressed by you. He was holding her eyes. But when it comes to Dorian, whether that's luck or a curse is worth thinking about. He didn't look away when he said it. Her breath went shallow. How much does he know? What did Dorian tell him? He couldn't have told him. He wouldn't. Beth, Zach's voice pulled her back. His hand had come to her arm, not firmly, just steadying. You okay? She was opening her mouth to answer when a voice came from the open doorway and stopped everything. Zach! The voice cut across the room from the open doorway. Low, controlled, carrying the specific weight of someone who didn't need volume. Both of them turned. Dorian Harrison was standing in the frame, one hand near the edge of the door, dark suit, face unreadable. He wasn't looking at his brother. He was looking at her. And the force of it landed before she'd fully registered he was there, low in her body, immediate, the same as it had always been. A month hadn't touched it. Zach's hand dropped from her arm. Dorian. His voice was flat with surprise. I didn't know you were back. Dorian's gaze stayed on Beth. Then his voice came out with enough steel underneath it to make her skin go tight. Leave! Beth held his gaze for exactly 1 second, long enough, and then she picked up what remained of her coffee and walked out. As she passed him in the doorway, he stepped aside. Just enough. Not by much. She caught the faint scent of him, mint, and something colder underneath it, and the elevator moved through her body like a reflex. Behind her, she heard Zach's voice, quieter now as the door began to close behind her. Why were you that sharp with her? Beth walked to her office, pulled her bag from the chair, and stood there for a moment with it over her shoulder. 1 month without him on this floor, and she hadn't noticed how much easier she'd been breathing. She noticed now. The next morning, Beth told herself she had imagined half of it. The charge she had carried all the way home and into sleep, restless, shallow, waking twice before dawn, with the feeling that something unfinished had followed her into the dark. By 9:30, the 32nd floor had gone back to its usual shape. Glass, screens, measured voices. Beth almost managed to believe the night before had never happened. The team was still going when Zach and Dorian walked in. They had been at it for the better part of an hour. 6 people around the conference table, the latest version open on 3 screens at once. Beth was in the middle of a sentence when the door opened, and the room recalibrated itself the way it always did around Dorian Harrison. A degree or two cooler, conversations pulling themselves into tighter shapes. Zach settled into his usual chair with the ease of someone who owned the room casually rather than absolutely. Dorian took the seat at the head of the table, set a black folder down without opening it, and waited. We've made good ground in the last month, Zach offered. I thought it was worth taking an hour to walk Dorian through where we are. A few people spoke. Integration notes, sync updates, the wearable latency issue they'd been chasing for 2 weeks. Beth kept her section brief and precise. Interface changes, response path simplification, the stripped-down emergency layer. She knew it cold. When she finished, the room held. Dorian's voice was measured and entirely flat. This is slower than I expected. Beth felt the sentence land before she fully understood it. We're a month in, she said, keeping her voice steady. The architecture had to be rebuilt before the user layer could move. That explanation works for committees. His gaze rested on her face, flat and unreadable. I'm not a committee. I want a working revision by Monday. Better than this. He rose. The meeting ended the way his meetings always ended. Not dismissed, just finished, the room understanding all at once that whatever shape the hour was supposed to take had already been broken. Nobody said anything to Beth as they filed out. Brenda's eyes found hers for just a second, sympathetic, careful, not enough to make it worse. Zach stayed at the far end of the table but didn't cross the room. Beth gathered her notebook and went back to her office, sat down, and opened the Oralis files. The anger needed somewhere to go, and work was the only place she trusted with it. By 10 o'clock she had reworked 3 screens, rewritten the response copy twice, and rebuilt the panic mode flow from a different entry point entirely. Her coffee had gone cold at some point she hadn't noticed. The same 2 lines of interface text had been blurring into each other for the last 20 minutes. She shut the laptop, pulled on her coat and picked up her bag. I hate you, Dorian Harrison. The thought arrived plainly, without apology. It happened to be true right then, and the walk to the elevator was long enough to need something to carry. The doors were already closing when his hand stopped them. Beth looked up, and the air in the elevator shifted before he'd even fully stepped inside. The doors slid closed behind him, and they stood there for one suspended second, both of them registering the same impossible fact. Him, here, again, in this same small space. The elevator began to descend. He was watching her profile, steady, patient, the kind of attention that settled without announcing itself. She kept her chin down and her eyes on the floor numbers. His voice came low in the small metal space. You stayed late. She didn't answer. She kept her eyes forward and her jaw set. He was speaking in the measured tone she was beginning to hate. The voice of a man who had decided what the conversation was before it started. In business, you don't carry wounds home with you. You're not at the reception desk anymore. This is a serious position. Her breathing was quickening. She could feel it. The heat moving up into her face, 4 weeks of careful professionalism pressing against something much less careful underneath. Her fingers found the panel. She hit the emergency stop. The elevator shuddered and held. Dorian turned to face her fully for the first time. Her voice came out unsteady at first, then steadied. Yes, she made herself look at him. I'm grateful to you. You believed in me. You supported me. You put me in charge of something that matters to me more than anything I've done in my life. Her throat worked once. And then you stood there with that face and humiliated me in front of my own team. She didn't look away. Why are you so hard on me? He looked away, just slightly. His eyes lifting toward the ceiling of the cab, as if the answer were somewhere above them both. Her voice came tighter now. You made me sign a contract that says I belong to you. There's a clause in there that reaches into my personal life. You know where I am, who I'm with, when I leave the building. Are you having me followed? His gaze came back to her. I told you that you were mine. A short, disbelieving sound escaped her. It's impossible to believe that the man standing here is the same man from that elevator. The words came faster now that she'd started. That man was warm. He talked to me. He calmed me down. He touched me. The memory surfaced in her voice before she could stop it. He kissed me. So what was that? You were trapped. You thought you might die. And you thought, what the hell? Why not? He took one step toward her. Unhurried, deliberate, the kind of movement that left her no room to misread it. His hand closed around her wrist, firm, certain, enough to stop her. His voice dropped. Lower now, rougher at the edges. Beth. His eyes stayed on her face. I remember everything that happened in that elevator. All of it. But you cannot let it affect your judgment here. What happened that day stayed in that day. That's as far as it goes. She pulled her wrist free. There were no boundaries in that elevator. His jaw tightened. We were waiting to die. The words came out rough. It wasn't real. For a second, the only sound was the faint hum of the elevator holding itself still around them. Her chin lifted slightly. It was real to me. The color came up in her face before she could stop it, hot in her cheeks, hot even behind her eyes. She turned away on instinct, not wanting him to see what that admission had cost her. His hand came up before she'd fully turned, one finger under her chin, tipping her face back toward his, and her breath caught before she could stop it. His eyes held something she hadn't seen since the first elevator, something that had been there all along under everything else, and that was almost harder to bear than his coldness. His voice had lost its edge entirely. "Beth." He watched her face as he said what came next, as if he knew what each word would do and couldn't stop himself anyway. "You're very young, inexperienced. I'm a workaholic, half the year in other countries, other beds." She felt that land, and he saw it. He didn't take it back. "This company isn't a safe thing to belong to. Neither am I. My life is work, travel, contracts, risk. I trust very little. Women, even less." His thumb shifted once, lightly, against her jaw. "That was your first kiss. Your first real moment with a man. And we both thought we were about to die." She stared at him for a moment that stretched too long. Her voice came out quiet and certain, tears bright in her eyes, anger rising fast to cover them. "You're a coward." She held his gaze. "You're afraid of what happened. Afraid of what you felt. Afraid of anything you didn't get to control first." The bitterness sharpened. "So all that warmth, all of it, you could only find it when you thought you were dying?" His jaw shifted. Something in his face changed, just enough that she caught it before he could put it back. Her eyes were burning. She reached back and hit the panel again. The elevator shuddered, readying itself. Her voice came out steady in a way that cost her everything it had. "This is the last time I'll bring this up, Mr. Harrison." She drew a breath. "I'm sorry. I crossed a line." His voice came sharper now. "Beth!" But the doors were already opening. She stepped out fast, already moving before she'd fully cleared the frame, heels too loud on the corridor floor, not slowing down, not looking back. She could still feel him standing there in the open elevator behind her. The same way she'd been feeling him since the beginning, before she had language for it. She didn't stop until the corridor ended. Her heart was still slamming when she did. "God, Beth!" The thoughts came in jagged flashes, matching her steps out to the street. "What have you done? You were supposed to stay away from him, not open yourself up to him again." And still, underneath all of it, more frightening than any of it, one thing stayed with her all the way to the lobby doors. He had not denied feeling it. For 2 days, Dorian stayed in the building and kept his distance. Beth did the same. It should have made things easier. It didn't. Avoiding him only changed the shape of her thoughts. He was still there, at the far end of a corridor, behind a closed glass door, in the way the floor seemed to tighten when his name came up. He didn't come near her. She didn't go near him. Zach filled the space instead. He was around the team constantly, easy with everyone, quick with a joke, warm in the effortless way that made people relax without realizing it. With Beth, the attention was sharper. A smile holding a second too long. A glance that kept coming back. Once, during a working session, he passed the glass wall and gave a small, lazy wink, and Brenda leaned toward Beth at once. "Was that for the whole room?" she murmured. "Or specifically for you?" Beth kept her eyes on the screen. "Don't." Brenda smothered a grin. Beth lowered her voice. "We are not in the same league. He would never be interested in me." The words sounded sensible. The thought that followed them was less so. If he were, maybe it would be nice. That was the irritating part. Zach was handsome, warm, easy to like. His attention should have been easy to accept. Instead, every time he smiled at her, Beth found herself thinking about Dorian Harrison. At the end of that afternoon's meeting, Zach stood and looked around the room. "One more thing. Tomorrow night, small in-house launch downstairs. Drinks, music, the usual attempt at morale." His mouth curved. "And Auralis will be officially introduced to the company." Brenda set her pen down with feeling. Thank God. 6 weeks of screens and bad coffee. I will absolutely take wine and music. A few people laughed. Beth did too, though more faintly. The word launch had settled somewhere complicated inside her, pride and nerves, and the uncomfortable awareness that the thing she had built alone in stolen hours now belonged to Harrison Technology as much as it belonged to her. Zach's eyes moved briefly to Beth before he left. "See you tomorrow." She had already looked away. That evening, she stayed late. Not because she had to, because working was easier than thinking. By the time she finally left her office, the floor had gone dark and quiet. She was halfway to the elevator when the voices reached her. Coming from the executive corridor, from the direction of Zach's office, she stopped walking. Zach's voice carried first. "You can't keep locking everything down just because you don't trust anyone." Dorian's came back lower, harder. "I don't care who likes it. The data goes nowhere unless I say it does." She was standing very still in the corridor, her bag over one shoulder. Then Zach again, louder now, something sharp underneath it. "We're sitting on something bigger than an accessibility platform, and you know it." The words pressed into her chest. Before she could move, the office door opened. Dorian stood in the frame. For 1 second, neither of them moved. The heat came up in her face before she could stop it. Her voice came out too quickly. "Good evening." She turned and walked toward the elevator. She didn't look back, but she knew, the way she always knew with him, that his eyes were still on her the whole way down the corridor. Noah was still awake when she got home, laptop open at the kitchen table. Beth dropped her bag and told him what she'd heard. She repeated the line that had stayed with her all the way home. "The data goes nowhere unless I say it does." Noah listened without interrupting. When she finished, he closed the laptop and signed, the habit when he was thinking carefully. That sentence matters less than who wanted the data to move. She frowned. "What do you mean?" His voice came steady, deliberate. If Zach was pushing and Dorian was stopping him, then the important part isn't Dorian saying no. It's Zach wanting it to go somewhere. Beth folded her arms, her voice tight. "But what can they do with it? It's still a support system." Noah's expression shifted. "It starts that way. But the same data shows how people react. When they panic, when they hesitate, what pulls their attention, what makes them freeze. A system that learns behavior well enough doesn't just support people. It can start to steer them." Beth bit the inside of her lip. Dorian had told her the data would be protected. She'd signed with that promise sitting next to her name on the page. He signed again. "Don't accuse anyone yet. Just watch who asks the wrong questions." Beth looked at him for a moment, then she nodded. She was watching. But for the first time since joining the project, what unsettled her went beyond Dorian Harrison. It was the thought that Oralis might become something far more dangerous than she had ever meant it to be. Beth came to work the next morning, dressed with more care than usual, and she knew it the moment Brenda looked up. The dress was black, simple, and just short enough to change the way it moved when she walked. She had styled her hair until it fell smooth and straight. Her makeup was light but deliberate, and the heels gave her a cleaner posture than the flats she wore most days. It was just enough to make her feel like she had chosen the day rather than survived it. Brenda took one look and leaned back in her chair. "Apparently there was an entire other version of you hiding under those office clothes." Beth laughed and set her bag down. "It's just a dress." "It is absolutely not just a dress." Zach came down the corridor at that exact moment, jacket open, coffee in hand, the unhurried walk of someone who had nowhere urgent to be. He didn't stop, but his gaze found Beth and held for exactly long enough, moving over her once, warm and specific, before returning to her face. Then he smiled, small, private, unmistakable, and kept walking. Brenda's eyebrows traveled. "That was not for the team." The heat came up in Beth's face. "Stop." He was on the cover of the Bay Women last year, most eligible bachelor in the city. Brenda lifted her coffee. Every woman in this building would destroy each other for that smile. Beth reached for a folder she didn't need. "He's not interested in me." The words came out too quickly. That annoyed her. More annoying was what came next. How fast her mind slid past Zach entirely and landed somewhere darker. She looked up, almost without meaning to, toward the corridor beyond the glass. Dorian hadn't been on the floor all day. After last night, After the sharpness in his voice behind that office door and the line about the data still sitting wrong in her chest, she hadn't known whether seeing him today would make things easier or worse. Not seeing him did neither. It only left the restless, stale feeling of a question that hadn't stopped moving. "Why?" she asked, before she could stop herself. "Is Dorian Harrison not nearly as popular?" Brenda snorted. "Because Zach smiles at people. Dorian looks at them like he's calculating how many floors they could fall." Beth smiled faintly. It didn't last long. By evening, the building had changed shape. The main hall had been dressed just enough. Warm lighting, servers moving through with wine, and small things nobody was hungry enough to eat properly, music sitting low beneath the room instead of trying to own it. People who usually passed each other in clipped silence now stood in loose groups with their voices up and their jackets open. Zach opened the evening from the stage, brief, polished, precise. Words about expansion, new divisions, Harrison Group moving into spaces that reflected not just power, but relevance. Then he introduced Oralis. Beth went up with the team, stood beneath the lights, said what she'd prepared. She looked out at 200 people and thought about a kitchen with chipped countertops and Noah doing homework across from her, and the second-hand laptop that overheated after an hour. That project had a chipped table and bad lighting. This one had a launch and an audience, and Harrison attached to it in ways she could no longer separate from herself. When the presentation ended and the team came back down into the room, someone pressed a glass of wine into her hand. She took it and looked through the crowd without deciding to. He wasn't there, and she caught herself minding before she could stop it. She turned back to the team. Zach joined them, the way he did everything social, effortlessly. 1 second he was across the room talking to a VP, the next he was at their table, already laughing at something Brenda had said, already fully present in a way that made everyone around him feel like the conversation was exactly where he'd meant to end up. He turned toward Beth. His voice dropped just enough. "You look beautiful tonight." The words landed more softly than she wanted them to. She lowered her eyes to her glass for a second, then lifted them. "Thank you." His hand came to rest lightly at her waist while he turned to answer something another team member had said, brief enough that she might have let it pass, but he didn't move it immediately, and she felt the warmth of his palm through the fabric with a clarity that made her pulse stumble. And she was still working out what to do with her face when she looked across the room. Dorian was standing near the far wall, half-shadowed between 2 senior executives. She hadn't seen him arrive. He wasn't looking at her face. He was looking at Zach's hand. Even from that distance, she felt it. The force of it hit her with the same precision she had felt in the elevator, as if distance changed nothing once he had decided to look directly at something. Then his eyes lifted to hers, just for a second. Then he turned back to the man beside him, as though he hadn't been caught at all. At Beth's side, Zach leaned in. "You look like you went somewhere." She pulled her eyes back. "I'm here?" His smile deepened slightly. "You are now." Something reckless loosened in her. The wine, his hand, Dorian already looking away. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Your support has made a real difference to this project. Working with you has been better than I expected." She could see it pleased him. "Then let's keep the evening going." He glanced around at the team. "I know somewhere a few blocks from here, a proper celebration, somewhere without company walls." And then the air at the table changed. Dorian arrived the way he always arrived, and everyone around him quietly adjusted. He nodded to the group and looked at Beth. His voice was low and final. "I need to borrow her for a moment." Zach's eyes moved between his brother and Beth. His voice came out easy, but it wasn't. "Now?" Dorian turned his head just enough to look at his brother. His expression didn't shift, but something in it closed the question before it could go any further. His voice came flat. "Yes, for work." Beth could feel the lie sitting in the air between all 3 of them. Zach's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. Dorian waited, unhurried, as though the truth were simply a detail he had already decided not to involve. His eyes came back to her, and she followed him. He wasn't touching her crossing the hall, wasn't touching her in the corridor either, but the distance between them felt more deliberate than contact would have, and by the time the music had faded behind the walls and the building sounded like itself again, quieter, colder, more private, Beth's pulse had already shifted. He stopped walking and turned, and his hand came to her waist in one motion, quick enough to steal her breath, controlled enough to feel inevitable. He walked her back one step until she was against the wall, both palms flat against the cool surface behind her. Dorian was close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, and the anger. His eyes moved briefly to the place on her waist where Zach's hand had been, then back to her face. She was still catching her breath when his voice came low. "What was that?" Her jaw tightened. "Excuse me?" "I was watching you." His eyes didn't move from hers. "All evening, with Zach." A short, disbelieving sound escaped her. "Are you serious? He's my employer." His gaze didn't move. "I know who he is. Stay away from him." "Mr. Harrison, you don't get to tell me who I stand next to. And besides, what exactly is this about? The personal contact clause? I wasn't breaking anything." "You know what you were doing." His voice came lower. "Are you trying to drive me out of my mind?" Her chin lifted. Something sharp and almost triumphant moved through her before she could stop it. She held his gaze. "And you do?" He didn't answer immediately. He just looked at her. Steady, unblinking, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off him. When the answer came, it was almost quiet. "Yes." The certainty in that single word made her want to push him back. Her voice sharpened. "My team is waiting." When she moved to step past him, his hand closed around her wrist, firm enough to stop her. "You're not leaving with them." She turned back sharply. "Why?" The silence that followed was brief. It burned anyway. His voice came out low and unhurried, the voice of a man who didn't need volume to make himself felt. "Because you're leaving with me." The words hollowed the air out of her lungs. He let go of her wrist and guided her forward from the small of her back, already moving, already decided. The car was waiting outside, the driver already at the wheel, the door closed behind them. The privacy screen rose with a soft, mechanical hum, sealing them in together. Beth turned toward him. "Where are we going?" Dorian was looking at her, the city lights moving across his face and then away. "Home." The car moved through the city without either of them speaking. Beth was watching the window, not looking at anything specific, just watching the lights blur past in long, amber streaks, using the glass as somewhere to put her eyes that wasn't him. She was aware of him beside her, in the way she was always aware of him. Not visually, not consciously, just there, the particular pull of him in a contained space. She kept her hands in her lap and her breathing even, and told herself she was fine. After a few blocks, she turned toward the dark dividing line of his profile against the window. "After all those conversations about boundaries." Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "Why are you taking me to your home?" He didn't answer immediately. The city was moving past them. "We need to talk," he said. She turned back to the window. She wasn't sure she believed him. The house was on a cliff above the water. She saw the ocean before she saw anything else. Flat, black, the city lights smearing across its surface. Clean lines, warm stone, wealth that had stopped needing to perform. Technology ran silently through everything. Lights adjusting as they entered, the house already awake and waiting. His scent was here too. Stronger than at the office, more settled, like it belonged. Dorian said his name. "Max." A cane Corso came around the corner, large, unhurried, and pressed his head against Dorian's hand, brief. Then he turned and walked straight to Beth, his tail moving with the absolute certainty of a dog who had already decided she was his person. She dropped her hand, and he pressed his head into it. Beth looked up from the dog to the view to the room. The high ceilings, the almost alarming cleanliness of it, the way everything had been placed by someone who knew exactly what they wanted and had not allowed for anything else. She was standing in the center of all that order in a sleek black dress, with her heart still beating too fast from the corridor, and she felt every inch of the distance between her world and this one. She was still standing there, one hand resting on Max's head, when Dorian moved to the bar along the wall. Glass clinked. He held one toward her. She shook her head. He set it back, poured a short measure for himself, and turned. He took one slow drink and placed the glass on the low table between them. Then he crossed the room and stopped in front of her. He was standing very close, close enough that she had to tip her chin up slightly to meet his eyes. Her voice dropped. "Why am I here?" His hand came up, not to her arm, not to her wrist, to her face. His palm settled against her jaw, his thumb moving once across her cheek in a slow, deliberate arc. Beth's breath stopped completely. His other hand found her waist and drew her in, not fast, not rough, just certain, until the full length of her body was pressed against his. She felt the warmth of him through the fabric of her dress, the steadiness of him, the contained force of someone who had been holding something in for a long time. She turned her face away. He rested his forehead against her hair. They stayed like that for a moment, not moving, not speaking, the ocean visible through the glass behind him, and his breathing slow and even against her temple. She was still trying to form a coherent thought when his mouth came to her ear, his voice barely there. "I'm trying to protect you, Beth." She turned her face toward his. Their mouths were so close that she could feel the shape of his next breath before he took it. Her voice came out barely a sound. "From what?" Both his hands came up to cradle her face, carefully, the way you hold something you're afraid of losing. His thumbs resting against her cheekbones, his eyes moving over her face, as if he were reading something. When he spoke, his lips were almost touching hers. "From questions you shouldn't be asking." His voice dropped to almost nothing. "From people you shouldn't get close to." She closed her eyes. She could feel the heat of him. She could feel her own pulse in her throat, in her fingertips, in the soles of her feet. The elevator came back to her in flashes. His hands, his breath, the taste of him, what it felt like to be held by someone who had already decided you were worth holding. She had been trying to forget that for 2 months. She had not forgotten any of it. His thumbs moved barely. Her voice was almost gone. "And from you?" He was quiet for a moment. When the answer came, it was barely there. "And from me." Her lips parted. "Then why now? Why tonight?" His forehead was pressing against hers. His eyes were closed. "Because I couldn't stay away from you any longer." Her lips found his. Something in her head told her to stop. The rest of her had already decided. She pressed her lips to his. Slow, barely contact. For one held second, he was completely still. Then he kissed her back. Slow at first. Careful. Almost wondering. Both of them still half afraid of what they were doing. Short, soft, unhurried. Then she kissed him again, and it was no longer careful at all. His fingers moved into her hair. She pressed herself closer and kissed him with everything she had been not saying for 2 months, and he made a low sound against her mouth, and it moved through her entire body. She reached for him, his shoulders, his jaw, her fingers finding the back of his neck, and he lifted her as though she weighed nothing and set her on the edge of the table, and she wrapped her legs around him and pulled him closer and heard her own shoes fall somewhere. His palms moved along her back, her sides, down the length of her spine, slow and deliberate, warm enough to make her breath catch, thorough enough to make her feel every inch of it. He pulled back just enough. His breathing was ragged, his eyes very dark, and he was looking at her the way she had never let herself fully imagine. His voice was wrecked. "You have no idea what you do to me. Tell me to stop, Beth." His hands tightened at her waist. "Because I won't be able to once—" She reached up and touched his face. Her fingers found the scar through his eyebrow, that small, familiar mark she had first noticed in the dark of the elevator. She traced it once, light and deliberate. Her voice came out steady. "Don't stop." Whatever he had been holding back gave way entirely. He lifted her and carried her across the room, lowering her onto the wide, soft surface of the couch with a care that contradicted everything burning in his eyes. She reached for his shirt and worked the buttons while he watched her, and when it fell open she spread her palms flat against his chest, his bare skin warm and smooth, the low definition of muscle under her hands. He pulled the dress over her head in one motion. Her hair fell loose around her face. Her lips were swollen, her cheeks were flushed, and her chest was rising and falling too fast, and she was looking up at him, and he was looking at her the way she had never let herself fully imagine. His voice came out very quiet. "You are the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." He held her face in both hands. "I knew it the first moment I saw you. I knew you were mine." He kissed her face, her cheek, the corner of her mouth, unhurried, as if he had nowhere else to be. She reached for his ear, the small device behind it, and lifted it away carefully. He watched her do it, his expression doing something she couldn't quite name. She brought her mouth to his ear, close enough that even without the device he would catch it. She spoke directly into it, her voice almost nothing. "I've been thinking about you every day. I've been imagining this. I've been living in that elevator over and over and over." He groaned against her skin and pulled her into his arms, and she stopped thinking entirely. There was only his hands, his warmth, the sound of his breathing against her skin, and the dark beyond the glass. Only the ocean beyond the glass, and the dark, and the two of them, finally. The morning came in pale and quiet. Beth was awake before Dorian, lying on her side, watching the grey light move across the ceiling. She could feel the warmth of him behind her, the slow, heavy rhythm of his breathing, one arm still loosely over her waist. Max was asleep on the floor near the door. She was staring at the ceiling, not moving, not wanting to move. "What have you done?" she thought. It wasn't a question she knew how to answer yet. She wasn't sure she wanted to. She stayed very still and let him sleep and watched the light on the ceiling change, and whatever came next, she was not ready for it. Not yet. Beth was lying on her side, her fingers tracing the line of his collarbone without quite deciding to. Slow, light, barely contact, the kind of touch that belonged to the hour before full waking, when the body does things the mind hasn't caught up to yet. Dorian opened his eyes. She stopped. He looked at her, those green eyes fully present in the early light, as if he had surfaced from sleep the same way he did everything else, completely and without apology. She smiled before she could stop herself. His hand tightened at her waist and drew her closer. She let herself be drawn. Her fingers moved along his jaw, his cheekbone, light, exploratory, the touch of someone trying to learn something by feel. A small smile came to her lips before she could stop it. The corner of his mouth curved, barely, but she saw it. His voice came low and amused, sleep still rough in it. "What? I don't know very much about you." Her voice came out quiet, almost wondering. Something in his expression warmed, not a smile exactly, but close. "What do you want to know?" She thought about it. "How old are you?" His hand moved along her hip as he answered. "I'm 36. Beth pulled back just slightly, looking at him with a small, surprised expression she couldn't quite hide. Then her fingers moved upward, finding the scar through his eyebrow, tracing it once, light and careful. Her voice came out quiet. "When did this happen?" His mouth moved. "I was 14. Zach and I got into a fight." Beth pulled back just enough to look at him properly. "Zach did that?" He held her gaze, not answering, which was its own kind of answer. She was quiet for a moment, the ocean filling the silence between them. When she spoke again, she kept her voice careful. "I was leaving the building, walking to the elevator." She watched his face. "I heard you. You and Zach were arguing." Dorian's expression didn't shift. He was watching her the way he always did when she said something that mattered. Completely still, missing nothing. She held his gaze. Her throat moved. Her voice dropped. "It was about the project data, wasn't it?" He said nothing. Her voice stayed even. "After the app launches, the data it collects from users, you're going to share it, aren't you? With governments, defense contractors, institutions that could use behavioral data to—" His fingers came to her mouth, not to silence her, just resting there, warm and light against her lips. His voice came low, very close. "Beth, technology is never innocent. In my hands, at least it stays controlled." He watched her eyes. "Think of it that way." She pulled his hand down gently, holding it. "That isn't a reassuring answer." He leaned in and kissed her, just once, brief and deliberate, and spoke against her lips. "The world is going to do this regardless, whether I'm involved or not." His mouth brushed hers again. "I'm getting there first and managing how it moves." Beth was looking at him, and the worst part was that she could follow the logic. What unsettled her was not the answer itself, but how completely he believed it. He moved before she could think, and a second later she was beneath him, the rest of the room falling away. His voice came low against her throat. "I want to hear you say it." He was closing the last distance between them, unhurried, deliberate, and her body rose to meet him before she'd made any decision about it at all. A helpless sound left her throat. "Tell me you're mine, Beth." She stopped trying to hold anything back, and when he lowered himself closer, close enough that his breath was all she could feel, the last of her resistance gave way entirely. His voice came lower still. "Tell me." His eyes were on hers and didn't move. She pulled him down. "Yours," she said against his mouth. "I'm yours." And even as the words left her, even as pleasure moved through her in waves she couldn't hold back or slow down, she was aware of something else underneath it all. The quiet, terrifying recognition that she wasn't just saying it, that she had been becoming his in slow increments for weeks, without permission and without a plan, and that the words were not a surrender so much as an acknowledgement of something that had already happened. She bit her lip against the sounds rising in her throat, his body above her, solid and warm, every muscle controlled and present, his eyes on her face and never anywhere else. Pleasure moved through her in waves she couldn't quiet, and in that moment she felt it with a clarity she hadn't expected. She belonged to this man. Not because he had taken her, because some part of her had been giving itself over, piece by piece, since the beginning. Whatever she had been holding back dissolved entirely, and for a long time after that there was nothing complicated about any of it. Just the two of them and the ocean beyond the glass, and the pale morning light moving slowly across the ceiling. They lay tangled together afterward, their breathing still settling, the quiet around them genuine rather than tense. Beth was staring at the ceiling. Dorian Harrison, she thought, is not a cruel man. That much she was certain of now, lying here with the warmth of him against her side and the slow sound of his breathing near her ear. He was not cruel, he was not careless. He believed in some specific and non-negotiable way that what he was doing was better than the alternative, and he had the capacity to make a convincing case for it, which was the part that made her chest tighten in a way cruelty never would have. A cruel man would have been simpler. Dorian was harder than that. She turned her head. His profile was against the morning light, one arm still loosely across her waist, his breathing slow and even. That was what made him dangerous, not the system alone. Him. It was the fact that she trusted him and wasn't entirely sure she should, and couldn't separate the two no matter how hard she tried. Beth was watching the city move past the tinted window of Dorian's car, the morning clean and cool and entirely indifferent to the fact that she had just spent the night in his house. She could still smell his soap on her skin. She was wearing yesterday's dress. "Getting out of your car this morning?" Her voice was careful. "At the office. Is that going to be a problem?" Dorian was watching the road through the partition. "Private garage. No one sees who gets in or out." She nodded. Her throat moved. He turned toward her, his voice dropping into something easy. "But if they did, I don't care." She let herself smile before she could decide whether that was a good idea. The silence that followed was the comfortable kind. After a moment, Dorian's hand came to her hair, just resting there, his fingers moving once through it slowly. His voice came quiet. "How long have you had the claustrophobia?" She was quiet for a second. The city kept moving past the glass. "The accident that killed my parents." She kept her voice steady. "I was in the back seat. Noah was at summer camp. We were on our way to get him." Her fingers pressed together in her lap. "I wasn't hurt, not a scratch, but I was in the car for 4 hours before they could cut me out." His hand stilled in her hair and stayed there. She looked at the window. "They had to saw through the door frame." She turned toward him. "What about you? Were you born deaf?" "No." His voice came even, practiced in the way of someone who had answered this question before and decided long ago not to be troubled by it. 8 years old, a blast. Her chest tightened. "A bomb?" He looked at her directly. My family has been in the weapons business for 150 years, Beth. She was staring at him. He reached over, took her face in his hand, and kissed her. Brief and deliberate. When he pulled back, his eyes were still on hers. This weekend. Pack for 2 days. His thumb moved once against her jaw. We're going to Hawaii. Beth's pulse shifted. She was still somewhere in the previous sentence. He let go of her face. His voice dropped. Beth, stay away from Zach. She was looking at him. You keep saying that. Because I know my brother. His gaze was steady, careful in the way it only was when something mattered. He likes beautiful things, but if you get in his way... He paused, just long enough. He's not gentle about it. His hand found hers and didn't let go. Keep your distance. They entered the building through separate doors. Beth spent the morning at her desk. The work was open in front of her. None of it was moving. Dorian Harrison. She kept turning it over, the way you turn something over to check if it's still sharp. The night, the morning, his voice saying things she was not going to repeat even to herself yet. And underneath all of that, sitting cold and specific in her chest, the data, the app, the weapons company that had been building things for 150 years. She had built Oralis for people like Noah, so no one had to be alone in the dark without a voice. The possibility that what she had built could be turned into something that learned human fear well enough to use it, that wasn't a worst-case scenario anymore. It was a clause in her own contract. She turned to Brenda. Do you know that Oralis's behavioral data could be developed beyond accessibility, into something that analyzes and influences people at scale? Brenda looked up from her screen. Absolutely. The architecture is incredibly adaptable. There was only admiration in it, not concern. And if it were developed into a tool for mass behavioral manipulation, Beth kept her voice even. A weapon, basically. Would that bother you? Brenda set her pen down. Honestly, a cell phone in the wrong hands is already a weapon. We can't stop what the technology becomes once it's out there. Beth pressed her lips together. But we can decide whether we're part of building it that way. Brenda gave her a long look. Where is this coming from, Beth? Beth looked back at her screen. Just thinking out loud? Brenda held her gaze for a moment, then turned back to her screen. Beth did the same. She spent the rest of the morning thinking very quietly and very specifically about a conversation through a half-open door. At noon, she didn't go down to lunch. She sat at her desk with the work open in front of her and her hands in her lap and thought about a sentence she hadn't been able to put down since she heard it through a half-open door. The data goes nowhere unless I say it does. Dorian had said that, and she had chosen in the days since to let it be reassuring. She had signed the contract. She had built the team. She had spent last night in his house and this morning in his car, and somewhere in all of that, she had stopped asking the question she should have kept asking. She needed to know. Dorian's suite required 2 key-coded doors and a biometric lock. She had learned that much in 6 weeks on this floor. But Zach's office was different. Zach left his door open half the time. Zach smiled at people. She pushed back from her desk. Don't, she told herself. You don't do things like this. This isn't who you are. She was already walking. She waited until the floor had cleared out, then walked to the executive corridor. Zach's office was unlocked. She let herself in, left the door slightly open behind her, enough to hear the corridor, and crossed to his desk. The drawers gave her nothing useful. She turned to the laptop. Her fingers were steadier than they had any right to be when she opened it. Password protected. The cursor was blinking at her with a patience she absolutely did not share. She pulled out her phone and called Noah. He answered in 2 rings. She could hear him already frowning. Where are you? Zach's office. She kept her voice low. She could hear the quality of the silence change. His voice came tight, the way it only did when something was actually wrong. Get out, Beth. These people, you don't know what they're capable of. I need you to get into a laptop, remote access. She could hear him breathing, deciding, deeply unhappy about where this was going. He sent the link 30 seconds later. She connected her phone to the laptop's hotspot. Noah's cursor appeared on screen, moving with quiet efficiency through directories that were not meant to be navigated from the outside. Folders opened and closed. A file list appeared, some names in code strings, most in plain text. And Beth was scanning fast when one of them stopped her cold. Black Vanta. She was still staring at it, finger hovering, not touching, when she heard footsteps in the corridor. Close, getting closer. Her hand moved before she'd made a decision, laptop lid down, phone in her pocket. She was already on her feet, pushing the chair back in by the time the door opened. Zach walked in. He stopped when he saw her. His expression didn't do anything alarming. It just reset itself, the way she had watched him reset in every unexpected room she'd seen him enter. And then he was smiling, easy and certain, as if she were exactly who he'd been expecting. "Beth." His voice was pleasant. "What are you doing in here?" Her mind was already moving. "I was looking for you, actually." She kept her voice easy, her hands loose at her sides. "I felt bad about last night. I had to leave before the team went out." He crossed the room toward her. Too close, almost immediately. His head tilted. "I felt bad too." His voice had dropped into the register he used when no one else was around. A celebration without the guest of honor isn't really a celebration. His hand came up and lifted the strand of hair that had fallen across her cheek. The same gesture, the same practiced ease, as if he'd been rehearsing it. "Maybe we can fix that tonight. Just us." Her heart was knocking hard, but she held his gaze. Maybe. She moved for the door before the silence could turn into something worse. "I'll wait for you after work," he called behind her, easy and certain, the voice of someone who wasn't used to maybe. Beth walked out. Zach watched her go. Then he crossed back to his desk and settled into the chair. His eyes moved to the laptop on the edge of the desk. The lid was slightly open, not the way he'd left it. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked toward the door she had just walked through. He reached for his phone. Beth was watching the corridor from her doorway, the elevator bank, the stairs, the angle from which Zach would most likely appear. She had her bag over her shoulder and her coat in her hand, and she had been doing this for 11 minutes. Her phone buzzed. "Dorian, meeting tonight. Won't be at the building. If I finish early, I'll call." She read it twice. Then she put the phone in her bag with more force than necessary. A man who ran 3 companies made time when he felt like it. She pushed off the doorframe and headed for the elevator. "Hey, Beth." Zach's voice came from the office at the end of the corridor. She stopped. He had a discrepancy, he said, between her version of the interface architecture and the one the team had been building on their end. He wanted to go through it together. Wouldn't take long. It took an hour. He was asking questions she could tell he already knew the answers to, working through the documentation with the careful patience of someone who had a different goal entirely. Beth kept answering, her voice staying even, her eyes going periodically to the glass wall and the corridor beyond it. The floor was thinning. She could feel it happening and couldn't do anything about it. By 8:15, the corridor outside was dark and quiet. Zach looked up from the screen. "Looks like we're the last ones." Beth closed the document on her own laptop. "I actually need to get going, Mr. Harrison." He was already standing. He came around the desk toward her, and she got to her feet a second too late. He was already there, already close, and the chair was behind her, and the desk was to her right, and the wall was where the room ran out. "Call me Zach." His voice was easy. "We've been over this." His eyes dropped briefly to her mouth and came back up. "And I thought we had plans tonight." Beth kept her voice level. "Actually, Dorian might not love that idea." He went still, his head tilted. "Dorian." The name came out measured. "You're on a first-name basis." She could hear her own pulse. "How long has that been going on?" The words came quieter, deliberate. She didn't answer. Her pulse was already too loud. He took one more step. She took one back, then another, and then there was no more room. The wall arrived at her shoulder blades, and she had nowhere left to go. His fingers came up under her chin and lifted it. "Beth?" His voice dropped low. "What were you looking for?" "In my computer." Her mouth went dry. "Nothing. I wasn't. I have security cameras." The ease in his voice had gone somewhere else entirely, and what was left underneath was harder and colder and very focused. "Tell me what you were doing." She pressed her lips together. Her pulse was loud in her ears. I wanted to know if Oralis was being used for anything beyond the accessibility framework. That's all. A short, flat sound escaped him. And what's it to you, Beth? There was nothing warm in it now. She kept her chin up. It's my project? She held his gaze even though everything in her wanted to look away. If it's being turned into something that hurts people, I don't want to be part of that. Zach leaned in. His face was very close to hers, close enough that she could see his smile clearly, and that it stopped well short of his eyes. You're very noble. His voice was almost admiring, but you shouldn't have gone looking. His fingers moved from her chin down the side of her throat, slow and deliberate. She shoved his hand away. Does Dorian know you're selling the data to Black Vanta? Zach laughed. A real one this time, the kind that had nothing to do with amusement. Oh, Beth. His voice was almost gentle now, which was worse. Do you know what kind of company this is? Oralis was an image project. That's what companies like ours do. We build something clean and visible, and it makes the rest of the portfolio look better. He watched her face as the words went in. It was his idea from the beginning. Everything in this building is his idea. Her eyes burned. Her voice came out flat. So, Dorian knew. Dorian decides. Zach spread his hands. That's how it works. And you, a 24-year-old with no degree and a half-built app, you were the perfect face for it. Smart enough to be convincing, young enough to be sympathetic. He paused. Dorian's instincts about people are very good. His hand came back to her face. His instincts about you were very good. She turned her face away from his hand, her jaw tight. You're lying. Zach tilted his head, something almost amused crossing his face. Do you know where Dorian is right now? His voice stayed pleasant, with an edge underneath it that wasn't. He's having dinner with Violet, his fiancée. He watched the word land. I assumed he'd mentioned her. The air went out of her chest. She was still trying to breathe around it when he nodded slowly, his voice dry. That's unfortunate. Beth pushed against his chest. He didn't move. He pressed her back into the wall, his hand flat against the surface beside her head. I think your time on the Oralis project has come to an end, Beth Robbins. You can't do that. Her voice came out tight. The project was my idea, my work. Your idea, his execution, his resources, his team. Zach looked at her evenly. Who do you think owns it? Her voice came out harder than she expected. I'll tell people what you're doing, what this company is doing. His smile didn't change. And who's going to listen to a receptionist? Her eyes filled. She couldn't stop it. She got her hand around his wrist, the one against the wall, and held on. Her voice dropped to barely anything. Let me go. You can walk out of here right now, Beth, but if you say a word about any of this, to anyone, I will end your brother's scholarship. I will make sure neither of you finds work in this city again. His voice was very quiet. I have the reach to do it. You know I do. She was gripping his wrist hard enough to feel the bones, her jaw tight, her eyes full, and she was absolutely not going to cry in front of him. But the words about Noah were still moving through her, slow and cold, settling somewhere she couldn't push them out of. Are we understood? Then a voice came from the doorway, low and hard and absolutely final. Let her go, Zach. Don't touch her. Dorian Harrison was standing in the open doorway, his eyes burning. Dorian's hand came up. Come here, Beth. The words came low and final, not a request. Zach understood them that way. He let go. She crossed the room to Dorian in a few quick strides, and the moment she reached him, she felt the shift. The air around him was different from the air around Zach, colder and more controlled, a stillness that came before something broke. He was looking at his brother with an expression Beth had not seen on him before, deliberate, controlled, something behind it she couldn't name. She's with me, Zach. He spoke with brutal calm, each word landing separately. You don't put your hands on her. Zach straightened his jacket. Your cute receptionist walked into my office, Dorian. She went through my computer. He spread his hands, easy and reasonable, the way he always was when the ground was shifting under someone else. She's been asking questions about business arrangements that have nothing to do with her. Dorian looked at Beth. She met his eyes, and the heat in her chest finally had somewhere to go. You told me Oralis wouldn't be used to hurt anyone. The words came out steadier than she felt. Zack is planning to sell the data to Black Vanta. Did you know that? His expression shifted, barely, briefly, and she caught it anyway. The look in his eyes went hard. Wait outside. The words came out flat, no room in them. This is between me and Zack. She was staring at him. He held her eyes and said nothing. The silence went on long enough that the answer was in it. She bit down on the inside of her lip. Her head turned slowly, side to side. She heard the tremor in her own voice, but kept going anyway. You're exactly the same, both of you. I was naive enough to think this was real. A project that mattered, built for the right reasons. Her eyes were burning. From the beginning it was just a front, something clean to put in front of the cameras, while the rest of the portfolio stayed dirty. She looked from one to the other. I'm done with both of you. I quit. From beside her, Zack exhaled, something between amusement and contempt. She didn't look at him. She was still looking at Dorian. This was my project, my idea, and I am considerably more than a receptionist, and I think you both know that. She held his gaze for one more second. You can't frighten me into staying. Beth? Her name left his mouth sharper this time, like a door closing. We'll talk, later. She turned and walked out. She stopped at her own desk long enough to grab her bag. The elevator was waiting. She stepped in and hit the lobby button and kept her eyes on the doors as they closed, not letting herself look back down the corridor. Her hands were shaking. Her whole body was. She pressed her back against the elevator wall and stared at the doors. He didn't deny any of it, she murmured to herself. The doors closed. Dorian watched the elevator doors close. Then he turned, his voice cutting across the room. What the hell do you think you were doing, Zack? It wasn't a question. Zack let the silence sit, spread his hands and laughed, easy and open, genuinely entertained. Dorian! His voice had that warmth he used just before he said something that wasn't warm at all. Did you fall for her? Dorian was still standing exactly where he'd been when Beth walked out. She's a beautiful girl, I'll give you that. Zack tilted his head. But you never showed weakness, not once. He studied his brother with the same patience he brought to contracts. Thorough, methodical, looking for the line that shifted everything. What happened to you? Don't. Dorian's voice was very quiet. I told you what this project was. An image play. Ours alone. Nothing leaves this company. His eyes stayed on Zack's face. So tell me why you're running deals behind my back. Zack dropped the smile. Because this is how we operate, Dorian. This is how we've always operated. We find leverage, and we use it. He crossed his arms. I'm not shutting down a profitable arrangement because you've developed a soft spot. A small smile crossed Dorian's mouth. I'm telling you once more, Zack, my word is final in this company. He took a step forward, and his voice stayed low and absolutely level. You will end the Black Vanta discussions, all of them. His eyes didn't move from his brother's face. And Beth is mine. If you weren't my brother, his eyes stayed on Zack's face. I would make you regret the day you put your hands on her. Do it again, and I will. He turned towards the door, and behind him, Zack leaned back against the wall, hands sliding into his pockets. You're turning on your own brother for a nobody. He said it almost lightly, like it cost him nothing. Dorian stopped walking and turned back. You slept with Violet, Zack. Each word came out separate, quiet, without heat. My fiancée, and I let it go. His eyes were on his brother's face and didn't move. I won't let it go again. He walked out. Zack stood against the wall with his hands still in his pockets, and after a long moment he pushed off it and moved to the window, looking out at the city below. Whatever he was thinking, he kept it. Beth had gotten as far as the street before the tears came, and she had held them until she was outside, which was the deal she'd made with herself in the elevator. She walked fast, head down, the night air cold against her face. She was half a block from her building when she came around the corner. Dorian Harrison was already there. His car was at the curb. Dorian was leaning against it, phone in hand, her name on the screen, the call she hadn't picked up. His expression gave her nothing. She went still. Her chest was still tight from the stairs, from the elevator, from all of it. And now he was here, and her body registered him before she was ready for it. Then he crossed toward her. "I told you to wait." There was an edge in it. Controlled, but only just. "Come with me. Let's go somewhere and talk." "No." She kept walking toward the building entrance. "I'm not going anywhere with you." He fell into step beside her. "Beth, I can't work at Harrison anymore, Dorian." She stopped at the door and turned. She made herself look at him directly. The words came out steadier than she felt. "You gave me an opportunity. I know that, but I have ethics I'm not willing to compromise, and I can't walk back into that building." He stopped walking. "You have a contract." The words came out flat, no room in them for argument. She met his eyes without blinking, anger and something shaking underneath it. "Then take me to court." Something shifted in his face. "You think that's what this is?" She lifted her chin. "You have my project. There's nothing left to take from me. Go ahead." His hand came to her wrist, firm, and he wasn't letting go. "You think I'd walk away from you that easily, after everything that happened between us?" Her eyes burned. She didn't look away. She wasn't going to break down in front of her own building. "You forgot to mention you were engaged." The words came out sharp, controlled anger underneath each one. "Did Zach tell you that?" He was watching her face, reading it. She turned her head away. "I'm not engaged." His grip on her wrist didn't loosen. "Violet and I ended a year ago. Because of Zach." His jaw tightened. "He's been managing you. Everything he said." "It doesn't matter anymore." She pulled her wrist free and he let her. "I'm not interested in the details of your family. Whatever is going on between you two, I have a brother I'm responsible for and a conscience I can't ignore." She took a breath. "I don't want to be part of your world." He took a step toward her, something urgent breaking through the control. "The Black Vanta deal is finished. I killed it." His eyes didn't leave hers. "Oralis stays within Harrison and goes nowhere else. I promise you that." She was looking at him. Something in his face had come open, not much, barely, but enough that she could see it cost him something to stand there and take what she was saying. She kept her eyes on his. "It doesn't matter. Don't you see that? You used my project to clean up your company's image. Everything I built it for. What it means to me. What it means to Noah. You used it as cover." The words came quieter. "I feel like it's been ruined. I feel like I've been ruined." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, the words came stripped of everything else. "I want you, Beth." The words hit somewhere low and specific. She felt them move through her, even as she stepped back, even as she made herself keep going. "You can't have everything you want." She stepped back. "I don't want you. I don't want the company. I need you to leave me alone." She pulled her arm from his grip and pushed through the door. Her hands were shaking. She could feel it in her fingers, her wrists, all the way up. On the stairs, she pressed the back of her hand against her eyes and kept walking. She wasn't going to cry in the stairwell. She was going to get to her floor first. The apartment became the whole world for a week. She was not okay, and she wasn't pretending otherwise. She let herself cry when it came, and it came often. In the mornings mostly, when the light was wrong and the apartment was quiet, and she could feel the exact shape of everything she'd walked away from. She ate toast and leftover rice and watched things on her laptop that she couldn't remember afterward, and she kept her phone face down on the coffee table and only turned it over for Noah. She was not going back to Dorian Harrison or to Oralis. Those were the two things she was certain of, and she held them close. On the 8th morning, Noah came through her door with his coat still on. "Look at this." He held his phone out and waited. She took it. Her eyes found the headline before she was ready for it. "Harrison Group withdraws Oralis Accessibility Platform. CEO cites internal restructuring." She read it twice. Then again. She handed the phone back without speaking, and after a moment she murmured to herself, barely loud enough to hear, "At least he did that." That evening, Brenda picked a bar 2 blocks from Beth's apartment and ordered them both something with too much ice and not enough explanation. Brenda listened to the abbreviated version, then set her glass down. "I hear you. I genuinely do. But this is the world we live in, Beth. Every company we work for is probably doing something we'd rather not know about. We're all just playing the game." She swirled her glass. "For what it's worth, you should have seen Zach's face when Dorian made the announcement. Someone had a very bad morning." Beth's fingers were tight around her glass. "How's Dorian Harrison doing?" Brenda was looking at her carefully. "I only saw him the day he announced it. He's barely been in the building since." Beth nodded and kept her eyes on the bar top and didn't say anything else. The city was doing what it always did at this hour, spilling noise and light in all directions, indifferent and alive. She was walking through it with her hands in her pockets, letting herself think about him for the length of 1 block, which was the only ration she was allowing herself. The man under all that cold authority, who had watched her across rooms and listened to her like she was worth hearing, and held her in the dark and said things against her skin that she was not going to let herself remember right now. She pushed it down. She was not built for his world, and his world was not going to change to accommodate her, and those were simply facts. Her phone rang, unknown number, and she almost let it go. She picked up anyway. A man's voice, older, steady. He introduced himself. Northlight Systems. They'd heard she'd left Harrison Group and they were building something. He'd like to sit down with her. Beth stopped walking. "How did you get this number?" "We have our sources." There was a brief silence on the line. "We'd love to sit down with you." She stood on the pavement with traffic moving past her and thought about it. "Send me the address." Northlight Systems occupied a modest floor in a building that clearly didn't care about impressing anyone. No artwork, no dramatic views, a receptionist who offered coffee and actually meant it. Robert Thompson was somewhere in his 50s, with a face that had spent a long time being patient with people. He shook her hand and gestured to the chair across from his desk and asked her to tell him about Auralis. She meant to give him a summary. 20 minutes, maybe. She was still talking 45 minutes later when she caught herself and stopped. She hadn't planned to go that far in. But he kept asking the right questions, not about revenue projections or market positioning, but about the gap she'd seen, the specific problem she'd wanted to solve, the conversation with Noah that had made her understand what was missing. He listened with the patience of someone who was actually interested, and by the end of it she was leaning forward in her chair with her hands moving. Robert Thompson leaned back in his and smiled. "You're sharp and you know your subject." He said it plainly, no performance in it. "Can I ask, why didn't you finish your degree?" She settled back. "I needed to work full-time. It's been about 2 years." He nodded slowly. "What if that didn't have to be the choice anymore? We could structure things so you're working here and finishing school at the same time." He folded his hands on the desk. "A mind like yours, Colm, it would be a waste not to." She bit her lip. Then she leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Thompson, before I say anything else, what does Northlight invest in? What kind of work?" He leaned forward slightly, patient and warm. "We don't work in defense or weapons, Beth. We don't fund systems that make people easier to control." He paused, choosing the words carefully. "We fund technology that makes life worth living. Health, accessibility, education. Things that give people more capacity, not less." He spread his hands. "If a project diminishes people, we don't touch it. If it expands what they're able to do, we're very interested." Beth was looking at him for a moment, reading his face, making sure. Then she extended her hand across the desk. "Then we have a deal. 3 months at Northlight." And Beth had mostly stopped counting. The work was real, genuinely hers in a way the Harrison job had never fully been, and most days that was enough to keep the rest of it at arm's length. She had renamed the project Echo and rebuilt it from scratch with a new team, and it was hers in a way Auralis had stopped being the moment she'd understood what it was being used for. She was back in school 2 evenings a week, which was harder than she'd expected and more satisfying than she'd thought possible. Most days she didn't think about Dorian Harrison, and the days she did, she let herself be wry about it. Brenda had mentioned the last time they'd met for drinks that he was somewhere in Tokyo or London, she couldn't remember which, only that he hadn't been at the building in weeks. That made sense, Beth thought. Dorian Harrison had always been more absence than presence. Even when he was in the room, he was partially elsewhere, already thinking 3 moves ahead of everyone around him. She had no idea what dangerous and strategic arrangement he was currently navigating. He said he wouldn't let me go and then vanished, she thought one morning, over her coffee. She smiled at herself, faint and useful. I almost believed it. The morning started quietly after that, until it didn't. She was at her desk when the alert came through, a push notification from a news app she barely used anymore. She opened it without thinking. Breaking. Shooting reported outside Harrison Group headquarters. Multiple casualties. Harrison Group owner Dorian Harrison among those injured and transported to St. Michael's Medical Center. She read it twice. The words stayed on the screen. Her breath went somewhere she couldn't find it. Her hands were already moving, bag, coat, door, before she'd made any decision at all. St. Michael's was 12 minutes by cab and felt like 40. The floor Dorian was on was private and locked down. A security detail at the elevator, another at the corridor entrance, the kind of quiet that hospitals got when someone important was inside, and the hospital knew it. Beth was at the nurse's station, keeping her voice calm and her face neutral, asking what she could ask. The nurse who answered was young and apologetic, not authorized to share information with non-family. Beth nodded and stayed where she was, watching the floor settle into its rhythm, until she caught the eye of a different nurse, older, watching her with the careful look of someone weighing what to say. "He's out of immediate danger," the woman said quietly, already moving away. "That's all I can tell you." Beth's shoulders dropped half an inch. She was standing against the wall, letting herself breathe. Out of immediate danger. He was going to be okay. She had known on the way over that she had no reason to be here. She had come anyway. She was about to push off the wall when she heard it, a murmur from the security detail near the corridor door. One of them stepped forward and pressed the door open from the inside. His voice was deferential, practiced. "Go ahead, please, Mr. Harrison's fiancée." A woman came through, tall, dark blonde, a coat worn with the ease of someone who had never needed to think about what things cost. She moved through the corridor without looking at anyone. The door closed behind her. Beth stood very still. Something in her chest pulled tight and didn't let go. Then she looked down at her own hands, still holding her bag strap, knuckles a little white, and made herself let go. Zach had told her. Dorian had denied it, and she had chosen to believe him because she wanted to, and now she was standing in a hospital corridor, no reason to be there, no claim on any of it, while his fiancée walked through doors that didn't open for her. She straightened her coat and told herself it didn't matter. There had never been anything real to hold on to. Dorian Harrison's world had always been closed to her. She had just spent a few months forgetting that. She didn't look back at the door. She walked to the elevator and pressed the button and stood in the quiet corridor and waited for it to come. The news came in pieces, as it always did with people you were trying not to think about. A headline, then a brief mention from Brenda over coffee. Dorian Harrison was recovering well, back at a board meeting, then a press conference. Standing, steady. The story moved on, and Beth let it. Time was doing what time did. She was busy enough that whole days passed without the thought of him, and then a week, and then something that was starting to feel like ordinary life. 3 more months at Northlight, and Echo was almost ready. The night before launch, Robert's assistant knocked on Beth's office door at 6:30. Robert Thompson was at his desk when she came in, his jacket off, reading glasses pushed up on his head. He gestured to the chair across from him. Robert leaned back. 6 months. Beth, the fact that we're sitting here the night before a global launch, that's not something that happens often. She settled into the chair. It barely feels real. Robert looked at her over the desk. It shouldn't. It's remarkable. He took off the glasses and set them on the desk. We built on a strong foundation. Yours. His voice was direct. The work you'd already done. That's what made this timeline possible. Her chest tightened. Her voice came out quieter than she expected. It's in the right place now. That's what matters to me. that it's here, for the right reasons. Robert smiled, the same unhurried smile she'd come to recognize as his version of warmth. For what it's worth, Harrison Group letting you go was the best thing that happened to this company. He paused, a dry humor briefly crossing his face. And to you, I suspect? She laughed, which surprised her a little. His tone shifted, lighter. How are classes going? She felt herself smile. 6 months to graduation? He leaned forward and tapped the desk once, lightly. A gesture she'd learned meant he was pleased with something. You're going to move fast in this company, Beth. I want you to know I mean that. She was looking at him, this man who had called a stranger on a sidewalk, listened to an hour of her talking and meant every word he'd said since. She held his gaze. Thank you. For the chance. For all of it. He waved it off. Get some sleep. Big day tomorrow. She was still smiling when she stepped back into the corridor, the building quiet around her, the city moving past the windows as it always did. Indifferent, constant, entirely unaware that tomorrow something she had built from nothing was going to reach the world. She stood there for a moment and let herself feel it. The California Bay Hotel ballroom did something to your posture the moment you walked in. Beth had walked into it in a burgundy dress with her brother beside her and her name on the program, and none of it felt entirely real yet. The room was full. Media, investors, accessibility advocates, people who had flown in from 3 time zones. The stage at the far end was lit in warm white, a screen behind it bearing the Echo logo she had drawn on a napkin 8 months ago. Noah bumped his shoulder against hers. His hands were already moving. You built this. I want you to know I know that. She was looking at him. The familiar face, the eyes that had always seen too much. And she could feel something rising in her chest that she didn't have a name for yet. Stop, she signed back. You'll make me cry before it starts. He grinned. Good. Cry in the good dress. Make it count. Robert Thompson took the stage at 8 o'clock, and the room settled for him, easily, without force, everyone simply deciding to pay attention. He spoke about Northlight's founding principles, about the gap in the market for technology that served people rather than extracted from them, about what Echo was and what it was designed to do. He spoke about Beth's team by name. The screen behind him showed the interface, live demonstrations, testimonials from users in the beta program. Beth was watching from the front row, hands in her lap, back straight, jaw tight. The controlled stillness of someone holding themselves together by choice. Then Robert paused. Not the pause of someone searching for words, but of someone who had already decided and was taking a breath before he crossed the line. Before I close, I want to name someone who wasn't on tonight's program. His voice was even, deliberate. Someone who founded this company. Not publicly, not under his own name. Not until tonight. Who provided the capital, the infrastructure, the long-term funding that made everything in this room possible? He looked out at the audience. Our silent partner has decided he no longer wants to be silent. Journalists were already reaching for their phones. A murmur moved through the room. Beth turned to Noah, her voice dropping with the weight of it. Northlight belongs to Robert Thompson. Noah's brow pulled together. He signed, quick and certain. That's what I thought. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert's voice carried over the room. The co-founder and primary investor of Northlight Systems, Dorian Harrison. The room held for exactly 1 second, and then it broke open. Beth's fingers were already around Noah's arm before she understood why. The blood had left her face. She could feel it, the specific cold that moved from her chest outward. And her pulse was loud in her ears, and she was still trying to form a single coherent thought when Dorian walked onto the stage and the room went white with flashes. He was standing at the center of the stage, waiting while camera flashes went off and voices from the media section started calling out questions, the room trying to recalibrate in real time. Dorian raised one hand and the room went quiet, not because he demanded it, but because his stillness made noise feel unnecessary. I know. His voice was calm through the microphone. I'm aware this is unexpected. You're not accustomed to seeing me at a press event. A brief pause. Or any event. The room laughed, low and surprised. I've been running my family's defense company for most of my adult life. I asked for this partnership to remain private. At least until I'd stepped back from Harrison Group entirely. He looked out at the audience. That step is now complete. Northlight is where I intend to build from here. A journalist's hand shot up. Mr. Harrison, why the change? Are you leaving defense manufacturing permanently? Dorian was looking at the journalist for a moment. Then he looked somewhere else, scanning the room slowly until he found what he was looking for, there in the front row. His eyes rested on Beth. She felt it before she consciously processed it. The weight of his attention finding her across a room full of 300 people, specific and deliberate, as if the other 299 people weren't in the room. Her breath caught. Her hands tightened in her lap. Then he looked back at the room. Someone once told me, in the dark, when we both thought we might not make it out, that something can be built for only one reason, just to help people. Nothing else. The room was very still. I didn't believe that was possible. In my world, everything has a second purpose. Everything is leverage. I built my career on that assumption. Camera flashes kept coming. I was wrong. Whispers ran through the room. There is a kind of intelligence that sees the person before it sees the system, that understands what's broken before it understands the market. I encountered that kind of intelligence, and it changed how I see what's worth building. His eyes were moving across the room again, back to her, brief and certain. Northlight exists because someone showed me that the most powerful thing you can construct is something that gives people back what they've lost, a voice, a connection, a way to be heard. I decided I wanted to be part of that, only that. Tears were running down Beth's face. She wasn't trying to stop them. Beside her, Noah had gone very still. Dorian's voice continued, quieter now, but still carrying. Tonight I want to introduce someone to this room. The person whose idea and name started this project, whose ethics and integrity should be a model for every company in this industry. He paused. A remarkable person, a brilliant woman. Another pause, and this one was different. And the person who changed my life. He reached up and touched the device behind his ear. I've been 80% deaf since I was 8 years old. I hear through this. His voice didn't change. But what it means to feel something, to have words land not just in your ear, but in your chest, that I learned from someone else. His eyes found hers. Please welcome to the stage, Beth Robbins. The room was already turning toward her. Noah's elbow found her ribs. Go. Right now. Go. Beth stood. She was moving before she decided to. Through the applause, through the noise, her hands at her sides and her jaw set, and everything in her focused on the stage at the far end of the room. Her hands were trembling. She could feel it in her fingertips and kept them still anyway, walking the length of that room with 300 people watching and only looking at one of them. She stepped onto the stage. He was right there, close enough that she could see the scar through his eyebrow, the green of his eyes catching the light. He didn't say anything, just looked at her, which was enough. She turned to the microphone. The room was looking at her. Cameras, journalists, Noah somewhere in the front row, and Dorian 2 feet to her left. She could feel her heart in her throat. She took a breath. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. She tried again. I just wanted to make things a little easier for my brother. She could feel her voice threatening to break and held it. That was all it ever was. One person trying to reach another. She turned her head. Dorian had been looking at her since she stepped onto the stage. I want to thank Mr. Thompson for giving this project a home. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. And I want to thank... She paused just long enough, holding Dorian's gaze. Mr. Harrison, for making it possible, for believing it was worth building. She stopped, started again. He tries to hide it, but he has one of the most extraordinary hearts I've ever encountered, and I think the world is about to find that out. The applause started before she finished the sentence. Noah was on his feet in the front row, signing something she couldn't read from the stage, his face wide open with a feeling she recognized. She was still looking at Dorian. He was still looking at her. Neither of them moved. She was off the stage before the applause had finished. moving fast enough that people near the exit stepped aside without being asked, her heels clicking against the marble floor of the corridor, her breath coming short for reasons that had nothing to do with running. The ballroom noise fell away behind her. She found the elevator bank, pressed the button, and stood there with her arms crossed over her chest, staring at the doors. She could hear him behind her before he spoke. "Beth." His voice cut through the lobby quiet. She pressed the button again. The doors opened. She stepped in and hit the close button, hard, twice. But the door had barely begun to move when his hand came through the gap, and it reversed itself and opened again, and Dorian stepped in. He reached past her and pressed the button for the top floor. The doors closed. She was trying to remember how to breathe normally. She was doing a poor job of it. He moved in one step, and his arms came around her waist, and he kissed her. Urgent, certain. A kiss that asked nothing and took everything. And she kissed him back for 3 full seconds before she got her hands between them and pushed. "You tricked me again." Her voice came out unsteady. "You built all of this around me and I had no idea." "I never tricked you." His voice was low, controlled. "I needed time, Beth. Time to close out Harrison Group. Time to make sure you were safe before I came back." He held her gaze. That's all it was. She was watching him and trying to decide if she believed him and hating that she wanted to. He reached over and pressed the emergency stop, and the elevator stilled between floors. She moved to the opposite side of the cab, putting her back against the wall and her arms at her sides. Her lips were trembling, and she didn't try to stop it. "You gave this to me," she said. "This project, this company. You built the ground I'm standing on and called it mine." Her voice was very quiet. "That's not different from what you've always done, Dorian. You don't ask, you arrange." He let her say it. He didn't move toward her, just stood with his head slightly bowed, his hands loose at his sides. When he raised his eyes, his face was different in a way she hadn't seen before. "This time is different." His voice had lost its usual control, stripped down to something raw underneath. "When I thought I was dying, you were the only thing in my head. Just you." He stopped, started again. "I've spent my whole life taking things. I don't want to take any more." He held her gaze. "I want to be chosen." Beth pressed her back harder against the wall, keeping the distance between them. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "Who shot you?" "Black Vanta. The deal cancellation cost them something significant. They wanted to send a message, and no one walks away from companies like that without a response." She held his gaze. "And you left everything to Zach." "What I stood to gain was worth considerably more." His eyes stayed on hers. She swallowed. "I saw Violet at the hospital. The security team introduced her as your fiancé." The corner of his mouth moved, just slightly, dry and certain. Violet wanted something she'd always wanted. She was there for Zach, and she got it. He didn't look away. "That's where that ended, months before you came into my office." She was quiet for a moment. "Why do you want me?" Her voice came out before she could rethink it. "Dorian Harrison. You could have anyone. Why?" He took one step toward her and reached for the panel, not the stop button this time. He pressed something else, and the lights went out. Not completely. A thin line of green light seeped up from the base of the floor panel, the same emergency glow from the first time, just enough to see by. She was holding her breath. He was close. Not touching her. Close. The green light caught the line of his jaw, the scar through his eyebrow, his eyes in the low light. His voice came quiet into the dark. "Do you remember what you told me the first time we were in the dark together?" She couldn't find her voice. "You said, I want someone to love me. I want to fall in love. I want someone I can trust." His voice was very low. "I couldn't hear you, but I was reading your lips." Her eyes were filling before he finished. His voice dropped to almost nothing. "I felt every word." He was standing in the green dark with space between them, his voice carrying even at a whisper. "I've spent my entire life taking things. Companies, Contracts. Control. He stopped. I don't want to take you, Beth. His hand came up, palm open, facing her. An offer, not a demand. They were close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath. I want you to choose me, knowing everything, knowing who I was, knowing what it cost me to become someone worth choosing. In that elevator. I held your hands in the dark so you wouldn't be afraid. His voice caught just at the edge of it. Now I'm the one who's afraid. Beth was looking at him across the small, dark space of the cab. At this man who had run a weapons empire and cleared boardrooms without raising his voice, standing in the green-lit dark with his hand open and his voice cracked at the edges. She reached out slowly. Her fingers found his palm, and she set her hand there, and he closed his around it and drew her in. Close, and then closer, and his mouth found hers in a kiss that was nothing like the first one upstairs. That one had been impulse. This one was deliberate, careful in a way that felt enormous, like something that had been held a long time and was finally being set down. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. His voice was barely there. I love you, Beth Robbins. Without you, I'm in complete darkness. She pulled back just enough to see his face clearly. Her hand came up and found the small device behind his ear, lifting it away carefully, the way she had done once before in this same dark. Then she brought her mouth close to his ear and spoke directly into it, her voice soft enough to be breath. Just feel me. She pulled back far enough that he could see her face. She took his hand and placed it flat against her chest, his palm over her heart, and she held it there, and looked at him, and let him feel it. Her pulse against his hand, steady and certain in the green dark. She kept her eyes on his, and let her lips do the work. When you're with me, I'm not afraid of the dark anymore. I'm not afraid of small spaces. I'm not afraid to stay. Dorian's hand was still against her chest. His eyes were in hers, and neither of them moved. Then he reached into his pocket. The box was small and black. He opened it with one hand, his eyes not leaving her face. The ring caught the green light, a quiet, precise gleam in the dark. His lips moved, slowly, deliberately, shaped for her eyes, not her ears. Marry me, Beth. Be my light, forever. She was laughing and crying at the same time, both at once, which she hadn't known was possible. Her free hand pressed over his on her chest while the tears ran down her face. She could feel his pulse under her palm. Or maybe that was hers. She couldn't tell any more where one ended and the other began. She raised her free hand. The sign was slow, deliberate, her fist moving forward once, the first word she had ever pressed into his hands in the dark when they were both terrified, and the world had gone completely still around them. Yes. His breath left him in one long exhale. His eyes closed for 1 second. Then he was sliding the ring onto her finger, and then both his hands were around hers, closing around them, palm to palm. The same dark, the same green light, the same hands, the same elevator that started everything. She kissed him first this time. He kissed her back with everything he had, and somewhere in the middle of it, her shoulder found the panel, and buttons clicked, and the lights came flooding back, and the elevator lurched upward. They broke apart laughing, both of them actually laughing, which was something neither of them had planned for. And then they were kissing again, while the elevator rose and the light stayed on. This time, it didn't go out. Thank you so much for spending time with Beth and Dorian's story. I'd love to know where you're watching from, so feel free to share your country or city in the comments. And tell me, where do you think this story would go next? If you were in Beth's place, would you have said yes to Dorian? If you enjoyed the story, please support the channel with a like and subscribe. It truly means a lot. Thank you again for being here, and I'll see you in the next story.